The billionaire's hands were shaking as he stared at the cardboard sign. Virgin, $10,000, one night only. But when Amelia looked up at him with those desperate eyes, Dave Michaels made a decision that would either save them both or destroy everything he'd built in 30 years. Because what she didn't know was that her mother's kidnapping, the threats, even their chance meeting on that street corner, it was all orchestrated by the one person who knew exactly how to break the Smooth King. His own brother had been watching, waiting, planning this moment for 3 years. And now, with Vincent Torres' gun pointed at Amelia's head and 47 minutes until the FBI raid, Dave had to choose: sacrifice the woman who'd awakened his dead heart, or watch his empire burn as she died in his arms. But here's what nobody saw coming. If you're already enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. The 45th floor of the Michaels Tower pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel dagger, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the gray October clouds that perpetually shrouded the city. Inside the corner office, Dave Michaels, known in business circles as the Smooth King, stood motionless before those windows, his reflection a study in calculated perfection. At 45, Dave had mastered the art of emotional detachment. His tailored Armani suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, hung on his 6-foot frame with military precision. Not a single silver hair was out of place in his perfectly styled cut, and his steel blue eyes held the kind of coldness that had earned him his nickname, not for charm, but for the smooth, ruthless efficiency with which he dismantled competitors. "Sir." His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, barely penetrating his thoughts. Dave didn't turn from the window. Below, the city sprawled like a chessboard, and he was the king who had never been checked. "What is it, Patricia?" "The Henderson acquisition papers are ready for your signature. The family is. They're asking for one more day to consider." A ghost of a smile touched Dave's lips, not warm, but predatory. "Tell them they have until 5 p.m. After that, the offer drops by 20% every hour." "Yes, sir." The intercom clicked off, leaving Dave alone with the silence that had become his closest companion. 30 years of building his empire had cost him everything that mattered: his marriage, his relationship with his daughter, his capacity to feel anything beyond the thrill of conquest. But that was the price of power, and Dave Michaels always paid his debts in full. His phone buzzed. A text from his driver: "Car ready downstairs, Mr. Michaels. Dinner reservation confirmed at Lou Bernardine." Dave straightened his platinum cufflinks, a gift from his ex-wife before she learned what kind of man she'd married. Tonight was another business dinner, another deal to close, another step toward a summit that grew lonelier with each victory. He grabbed his briefcase, a leather monument to his success, and headed for the elevator. The city waited below, unaware that its most ruthless predator was about to encounter something that would shatter 30 years of carefully constructed ice. 23 blocks away, in the cramped studio apartment that Amelia Brown called home, the afternoon light filtered through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months. Not because Amelia didn't care, but because every spare moment was spent either working or sitting beside her mother's hospital bed. Amelia stared at the stack of medical bills spread across her second-hand kitchen table like a paper avalanche of despair. Each envelope bore the same merciless message: final notice stamped in red ink that might as well have been blood. $47,000, she whispered to the empty room, her voice cracking on the numbers that had haunted her dreams for weeks. How does someone even owe $47,000? But she knew how. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer didn't negotiate. It demanded everything: hope, time, money, and sometimes life itself. Her mother, Gloria Brown, had been fighting for 8 months, and the battle was bankrupting them both. Amelia's phone rang, the generic ringtone jarring in the silence. The caller ID made her stomach clench. Seattle General Hospital. "Miss Brown." The voice belonged to Dr. Martinez, her mother's oncologist. "I'm calling about your mother's treatment plan." Amelia closed her eyes, bracing for impact. "What is it?" "The insurance company has denied coverage for the next round of chemotherapy. Without it." Dr. Martinez's pause spoke volumes. "I'm sorry, but we need payment up front. $15,000 for the next cycle." The number hit Amelia like a physical blow. She sank into her second-hand chair, the one with the broken spring that jabbed her back every time she sat down. "How long do I have?" "The treatment needs to start Monday, or we'll lose the window." "I'm sorry, Miss Brown. I wish there was another way." After Dr. Martinez hung up, Amelia sat in the growing darkness of her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her failure. She worked 2 jobs, morning shifts at a downtown diner and evening shifts cleaning office buildings, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Her gaze fell on the framed photo beside her laptop, her and her mother at Amelia's high school graduation 6 years ago. Gloria's smile was radiant, her arms wrapped around her daughter with fierce pride. "You're going to change the world, baby girl," she'd whispered that day. "I just know it." Now, at 24, Amelia felt like the world was changing her instead, grinding her down, stealing her dreams one unpaid bill at a time. She'd had to drop out of nursing school when her mother got sick, abandoning the career that was supposed to lift them both out of poverty. Her laptop sat open on the table, the cursor blinking in the search bar like a heartbeat. For weeks, she'd been researching every legal option. Loans, grants, fundraising platforms. All dead ends. Her credit was destroyed, her income too low for any legitimate lending institution. But there were other options. Darker options that made her stomach turn even as desperation whispered their possibilities. Amelia's fingers trembled as she typed, "Quick money for emergencies." The search results painted a picture of a world she'd never imagined entering. Escort services, sugar daddy websites, and buried deep in the forums, stories of women who'd sold the one thing they could never get back. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't worry about me, baby. God will provide. He always does." Amelia stared at the message until tears blurred the words. Her mother's faith had never wavered, not even as cancer ravaged her body. But God seemed to be looking the other way lately, and Amelia was running out of time to wait for divine intervention. She wiped her eyes and returned to the laptop screen. One forum post caught her attention, made $10,000 in one night. "Changed my life." If you're desperate enough, there are men who will pay premium for authenticity. $10,000. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but it would buy her mother another month, maybe 2. Time to figure out something else. Time to find another miracle. Amelia's hands shook as she created an anonymous account on the forum. She told herself she was just researching, just exploring options. But deep down, she knew she was already falling. The next morning arrived gray and unforgiving, matching Amelia's mood as she stood in the hospital corridor outside her mother's room. Through the small window, she could see Gloria sleeping, her once vibrant face gaunt and pale against the white pillows. "Miss Brown." A voice behind her made Amelia turn. It was Janet from the hospital's billing department, her expression a mixture of sympathy and professional necessity. "We need to discuss your mother's account," Janet said gently. "I'm afraid if we don't receive payment by Monday, we'll have to transfer her to the county facility." The county facility. Amelia had visited there once during her nursing school clinical rotations. Overcrowded, understaffed, where people went to die rather than fight. "Please," Amelia whispered. "Just give me until Monday. I'll have the money." Janet's eyes softened. "Honey, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've heard every promise, every plan. Where are you going to get $15,000 by Monday?" Amelia met her gaze steadily. "I'll get it." After Janet left, Amelia slipped into her mother's room. Gloria's eyes fluttered open, and despite everything, her face lit up with joy at seeing her daughter. "There's my beautiful girl," Gloria whispered, her voice paper-thin but warm with love. "You look tired, baby. Are you eating enough?" Amelia forced a smile and took her mother's hand. So fragile now, like holding a bird. "I'm fine, Mama. How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here." Gloria squeezed her daughter's fingers with what little strength she had left. "I had the most wonderful dream last night. I dreamed you were in a white coat, helping other people the way these doctors help me. You were so happy, Amelia. So proud." The words were a knife to Amelia's heart. Her mother still believed in the dream, still thought her daughter would become the nurse she'd always wanted to be. She didn't know about the dropped classes, the mounting debt, the impossible choices that lay ahead. "Mama," Amelia began, then stopped. How could she explain that she was about to sacrifice everything? Her dignity, her innocence, her future, for a chance to buy more time. "What is it, baby?" "I love you," Amelia said instead. "More than anything in this world." Gloria's eyes filled with tears. "I know you do. And I love you too. That's why I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't give up on your dreams because of me. Promise me you'll find a way to be happy, even if—" Gloria's voice broke. "Even if I can't be there to see it." Amelia kissed her mother's forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. "You're going to be there, Mama. I promise." But as she left the hospital that afternoon, Amelia knew she was about to break that promise in the worst possible way. That evening, Amelia sat in her apartment with a piece of cardboard and a black marker, her hands trembling as she wrote words that felt like signing her own death warrant. Virgin. First night. $10,000. The forum had been explicit about the market value of innocence. Men would pay premium prices for what they called authenticity, a clinical term for something that should have been sacred. The advice was simple. Be honest about what you're offering, set your price, and find a public place where potential clients could see you without immediate commitment. Amelia had chosen the upscale shopping district downtown, where wealthy men might be driving by. She'd borrowed her roommate's sailor-style top, something that looked innocent but eye-catching, and braided her hair to appear younger. Now, standing on the corner of Pine and Fifth Avenue, she felt like she was drowning in broad daylight. Every car that slowed made her heart race. Every glance from passers-by felt like judgment. But the cardboard sign in her hands was her lifeline, the only thing standing between her mother and the county facility. What would you do to save someone you love? She wondered, watching the evening traffic flow past like a river of possibilities and dangers. How far would you go when all other options are gone? A black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows reflecting Amelia's terrified face. The passenger window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in an expensive suit. He was older, maybe mid-40s, with silver-touched hair and eyes like winter storms. Dave Michaels had been on his way to another pointless business dinner when he saw her. At first, he'd assumed she was some kind of street performer or protester. But as his driver slowed for the red light, he read the sign, and something inside his chest, something he'd thought was permanently frozen, cracked. She was beautiful, yes, but that wasn't what stopped him. It was the tears streaming down her face, the way she held the sign like it was burning her hands, the absolute desperation in her posture that spoke of someone who had exhausted every other option. Dave had built his fortune by recognizing opportunity, but this wasn't business. This was a young woman destroying herself for reasons he couldn't fathom, and for the first time in decades, he felt something other than cold calculation. "Sir," his driver asked. "The light's green." Dave stared at the girl, She couldn't be more than 25, and made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "Pull over," he said quietly. As the Mercedes eased to the curb, Amelia's world tilted on its axis. She'd expected this moment, prepared for it, but nothing could have readied her for the reality of a stranger's window rolling down, revealing a face that would haunt her dreams. The man inside looked like he could buy and sell her entire world without blinking. His suit probably cost more than she made in 6 months. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch, not cruel or predatory like she'd feared, but filled with something she couldn't identify. "Get in," he said, his voice low and controlled. Amelia hesitated, every instinct screaming danger. But the image of her mother's face, the stack of medical bills, the ticking clock of Monday's deadline, all of it pushed her forward. She opened the car door and stepped into a world she'd never imagined, carrying nothing but her desperation and a cardboard sign that had just changed everything. As the Mercedes pulled away from the curb, neither Dave nor Amelia could have predicted that this moment, born from his unexpected compassion and her impossible choice, would become the foundation of something neither had dared to hope for. But first, they would both have to survive what came next. What do you think drives someone to make such a desperate choice? Have you ever faced a moment where love for family made you consider the unthinkable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the most powerful stories come from the most impossible situations. The leather seats of the Mercedes were softer than anything Amelia had ever touched, but they might as well have been made of thorns. She sat rigid against the passenger door, clutching her cardboard sign like a shield, acutely aware of the man beside her who radiated power and control. Dave Michaels hadn't spoken since she'd gotten in the car. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead as his driver navigated the evening traffic. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap. "Where are we going?" Amelia finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the purr of the engine. Dave turned to look at her then, and she saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. Not lust or cruelty, but a kind of careful assessment, as if he were trying to solve a complex equation. "What's your name?" he asked instead of answering her question. "Amelia." The word slipped out before she could stop it. She'd planned to use a fake name, to keep some part of herself separate from whatever was about to happen. "Amelia." He repeated it slowly, as if testing how it felt. "I'm Dave. And we're going somewhere we can talk." "Talk?" Confusion flickered across her face. I mean the sign." Dave's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I saw the sign. But before anything else happens, I need to understand why a young woman like you is standing on a street corner with a piece of cardboard that could destroy her life." The Mercedes turned into the parking garage of the Four Seasons Hotel, and Amelia's heart began to race. This was it, the point of no return. But something in Dave's tone, the way he'd said her name, made her feel like she was missing something crucial. "Mr. Michaels," the driver said as they pulled up to the valet station. "Shall I wait?" "Yes, Marcus. This won't take long." As they rode the elevator to the penthouse suite, Amelia caught glimpses of her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked exactly like what she was, a desperate girl playing dress-up in a world she didn't understand. The sailor top that had seemed appropriate on the street now felt like a costume, and the cardboard sign in her hands might as well have been a neon sign advertising her naivety. Dave's penthouse suite was a monument to wealth and taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline, while modern art that probably cost more than most people's houses adorned the walls. But Amelia barely noticed the luxury. She was too focused on the man who had brought her here. "Sit," Dave said, gesturing to a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. "Please." Amelia perched on the edge of the cushion, still clutching her sign. Dave moved to the bar and poured himself 2 fingers of what looked like expensive whiskey. He didn't offer her anything. "How old are you, Amelia?" 24. And you're really... He gestured vaguely at the sign. Heat flooded Amelia's cheeks. Yes. Dave took a sip of his whiskey, his expression unreadable. Why? The simple question hit her like a physical blow. All the shame, desperation, and fear she'd been holding back came rushing to the surface. My mother is dying, she said, her voice breaking. Cancer. The insurance won't cover her next treatment, and without it... She couldn't finish the sentence. Dave set down his glass and moved to the window, his back to her. How much do you need? 15,000. By Monday. The words tasted like ashes in her mouth. And you thought selling yourself was the answer? The judgment in his voice made Amelia's spine straighten. Don't you dare judge me. You don't know what it's like to watch someone you love dying while you're powerless to help them. You don't know what it's like to have tried everything. Loans, grants, fundraising, working 2 jobs until you collapse, and still come up short. Dave turned back to face her, and she saw something shift in his expression. You're right. I don't know what that's like. Then don't act like you understand my choices. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the expanse of the suite. Then Dave did something that shocked them both. He laughed. Not cruelly, but with genuine surprise. You have fire, he said. I wasn't expecting that. What were you expecting? Dave considered the question seriously. I don't know. That's what bothers me. He moved to his briefcase and pulled out a leather checkbook. Amelia watched in confusion as he wrote something, tore out the check, and held it toward her. What is this? She asked, not taking it. $15,000. Amelia stared at the check like it might bite her. I don't understand. It's not complicated. You need money for your mother's treatment. I'm giving it to you. But why? What do you want in return? Dave's smile was sharp as a blade. That's the question, isn't it? What does Dave Michaels want that he can't simply buy? Amelia's hands trembled as she stared at the check. $15,000, written in Dave's precise handwriting, made out to her name. It was everything she needed, everything she'd been willing to sacrifice herself for, offered freely with no strings attached. I don't believe you, she said finally. Nobody gives away $15,000 to a stranger without wanting something. Dave returned to his whiskey, swirling the amber liquid thoughtfully. You're right to be suspicious. In my world, everything has a price. Then what's yours? I want you to tell me about your mother. The request was so unexpected that Amelia blinked. What? Your mother? What's she like? What kind of person raises a daughter who would rather destroy herself than let her parent die? Amelia's grip tightened on the check. That's what you want? Stories. For now. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. Beneath the expensive suit and cold exterior, she glimpsed something that looked almost like loneliness. She's... Amelia began, then stopped. How could she explain Gloria Brown to a man who lived in penthouses and rode in Mercedes? She's the strongest person I know. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 8. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat, never missed a school play or parent conference, no matter how exhausted she was. Dave settled into the chair across from her, his attention completely focused on her words. When I was 16, I got into trouble. Nothing serious, just typical teenage stupidity. But instead of yelling or punishing me, she sat me down and said, "Baby girl, you're going to make mistakes. That's how you learn. But never make a mistake that costs you your future." Amelia's voice caught. She sacrificed everything so I could go to college, could become a nurse. And now you're sacrificing everything for her. She doesn't know. About dropping out of school, about the jobs, about tonight. She still thinks I'm going to graduate and change the world. Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks. She has so much faith in me, and I'm failing her. Dave was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. My daughter is about your age. The admission hung in the air between them like a bridge neither had expected. Is she close to you? Amelia asked. Dave's laugh was bitter. She hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Says I chose money over family. He met Amelia's eyes. She wasn't wrong. It's not too late to change that. Isn't it? Dave stood and moved back to the window. I've spent 30 years building an empire, crushing anyone who got in my way. I've forgotten how to be anything other than the smooth king. The smooth king. That's what they call me in business. Not because I'm charming, but because I eliminate obstacles so efficiently, so completely, that it looks effortless. He turned back to her. I haven't done a genuinely kind thing in so long. I'm not sure I remember how. Amelia looked down at the check in her hands. This is kind. This is guilt. What do you have to feel guilty about? Dave's smile was sharp and self-deprecating. Where do I start? The families I've destroyed through hostile takeovers? The employees I've laid off to boost quarterly profits? The wife I drove away with my ambition? The daughter who learned to hate everything I represent? But you stopped tonight. You saw me, and you stopped. I saw you, and I saw what I've become. Dave's voice was barely above a whisper. A man who lives in a world where everything is for sale, including innocence. The weight of his words settled between them. Amelia realized that this wasn't just about her desperation, it was about his recognition of what his world had become, what he had become. The check, she said carefully. There really are no strings attached? None. Then why do I feel like I'm about to make a deal with the devil? Dave's laugh was genuine this time. Because you probably are. But sometimes the devil is the only one with the power to help. Amelia folded the check carefully and slipped it into her purse, but she didn't move to leave. Something about Dave Michaels intrigued her. The contradiction between his reputation and his actions, the loneliness that seemed to radiate from him despite his obvious power. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. If you hate what you've become so much, why don't you change? Dave refilled his whiskey glass, considering the question. Do you know what I did today before I saw you? Amelia shook her head. I forced a family to sell their century-old business for a fraction of its worth. The Hendersons, they've been running a small chain of bookstores for 4 generations. But they made the mistake of expanding too quickly, taking on debt they couldn't service. Dave's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. I bought their debt, called it in early, and gave them an ultimatum. Sell to me at my price, or lose everything in bankruptcy. That's horrible. That's business. The Hendersons will walk away with enough to retire comfortably, and I'll turn their locations into high-end coffee shops that will generate 3 times the revenue. He met her eyes. Everyone wins. Except the employees who lose their jobs. Except the communities that lose their bookstores. Except the family that loses their legacy. Dave's smile was cold. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Amelia. The Hendersons' nostalgia won't keep their doors open if they can't service their debt. But you could have helped them restructure instead of forcing them out. I could have. But that would have taken time, effort, and there was no guarantee of success. My way is cleaner, more efficient. More profitable, you mean? Exactly. Dave raised his glass in a mock toast. Welcome to my world, where everything has a price and everyone has a breaking point. Amelia stared at him, trying to reconcile the man who had just given her $15,000 with no strings attached with the corporate predator he was describing. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be," she said finally. "Don't mistake one moment of weakness for character transformation." "Is that what this is? Weakness?" Dave's jaw tightened. "What would you call it? Human decency." The words hit Dave like a physical blow. He turned away from her, staring out at the city lights that twinkled below like fallen stars. "I haven't been accused of that in a very long time," he said quietly. "Maybe that's the problem." Before Dave could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression hardened. "I have to take this," he said, moving toward the bedroom. "It's about the Henderson deal." As Dave disappeared into the other room, Amelia could hear his voice change, becoming colder, more authoritative. The man who had just shown her unexpected kindness was gone, replaced by the smooth king who crushed obstacles without mercy. "No, I don't care about their sentimental attachment," she heard him say. "Business is business. If they don't sign by tomorrow, the offer drops to 60 cents on the dollar." Amelia stood and moved closer to the bedroom door, not intending to eavesdrop but unable to help herself. "What do you mean they're trying to find alternative financing?" Dave's voice was sharp now. "From whom?" There was a pause, then, "Community investors? Local business owners pooling resources?" Dave's laugh was harsh. "How quaint, and how naive. Make sure those potential investors understand the risks of opposing me. Sometimes good intentions aren't enough to protect people from the consequences of their choices." The threat in his voice made Amelia's blood run cold. This was the real Dave Michaels, not the man who had shown her unexpected compassion, but the corporate shark who destroyed lives for profit. When Dave returned to the living room, his expression was unreadable. "Everything all right?" Amelia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Just business." He moved to the bar and poured another whiskey. "You should go. Your mother needs that treatment." The dismissal was clear, but Amelia didn't move. "What you just did, threatening those investors, that's not business. That's bullying." Dave's eyes flashed dangerously. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know what I heard. You're going to destroy people who are just trying to help a family keep their business." "I'm going to protect my investment. The Hendersons took on debt they couldn't repay. That's not my fault." "But you're making it worse. You could help them find a solution that doesn't involve losing everything." "Why would I do that?" "Because it's the right thing to do." Dave set down his glass with enough force to make Amelia flinch. "The right thing. Do you want to know what the right thing got me? A failed marriage, an estranged daughter, and a reputation for being weak that nearly cost me everything I'd built." "So you decided to become a monster instead?" "I decided to become successful." "They're not the same thing." "Aren't they?" Dave moved closer to her, his presence suddenly intimidating. "You think kindness pays for cancer treatments? You think compassion keeps the lights on? You were standing on a street corner tonight, ready to sell yourself because being good wasn't enough." The words hit Amelia like a slap. "That's different." "Is it?" "We both do what we have to do to survive. The only difference is that I'm honest about it." Amelia stood, clutching her purse with the check inside. "Thank you for the money. But you're wrong about one thing." "What's that?" "Being good is always enough. It just doesn't always feel like it at the time." As she moved toward the door, Dave called after her. "Amelia!" She turned back, hoping to see some trace of the man who had first shown her kindness. "The world isn't a fairy tale," he said. Good people don't always win. Maybe not, she replied. But they sleep better at night. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending from one world into another. Amelia's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a young woman who looked fundamentally changed from the desperate girl who had entered the building an hour earlier. The check in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather. $15,000. More money than she'd ever held at one time, given to her by a man who seemed to embody every contradiction she could imagine. As she walked through the hotel lobby, Amelia's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Can't sleep. Thinking about you. Are you okay, baby girl?" Amelia stopped walking, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just happened. In a few hours, she could walk into Seattle General and pay for her mother's treatment. Gloria would live to fight another day, would have another chance to beat the cancer that was trying to steal her away. But the victory felt hollow somehow, tainted by the knowledge of where the money had come from and what she'd learned about the man who'd given it to her. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dave's number. Somehow he'd gotten her information, though she couldn't remember giving it to him. "Hello," she answered cautiously. "Don't deposit that check yet." Dave's voice was tense. "Why not?" "Because I need to ask you something first, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Amelia stepped outside the hotel, the cool Seattle air hitting her face like a wake-up call. "What? Do you really believe what you said up there? About good people sleeping better at night?" The question caught her off guard. "Yes. Even when being good means watching someone you love die?" Amelia closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's face, of the faith Gloria had always had in doing the right thing even when it was hard. Especially then. There was a long pause. When Dave spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, more uncertain. "I'm going to do something that goes against every business instinct I have," he said. "And I'm going to need your help." "What are you talking about?" "The Hendersons. The family I told you about. I'm going to help them keep their business." Amelia's heart skipped. "Really? Really? But I'll need someone to help me figure out how to do it without looking weak or setting a precedent that will destroy my reputation." "Why are you asking me?" "Because you're the only person who's challenged me in years and lived to tell about it. Because you see something in me that I thought was dead." Dave's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Because I want to be the kind of man who deserves to sleep well at night." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "What do you need me to do?" "Meet me tomorrow morning. Early. We're going to pay a visit to the Henderson family and figure out how to save their business without destroying mine." "Dave." "Yes. Thank you. For the check, for this chance, for—" She struggled to find the words. "For proving that good people can win sometimes." "Don't thank me yet," Dave said. "We haven't won anything. We've just decided to try." After he hung up, Amelia stood on the sidewalk outside the Four Seasons, looking up at the penthouse windows 40 floors above. Somewhere up there, a man who had spent 30 years building walls around his heart was taking the first tentative steps toward tearing them down. And somehow, impossibly, she was going to help him. The check in her purse would save her mother's life. But maybe, just maybe, she could help save Dave Michael's soul in return. As she walked toward the bus stop that would take her home, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn she never could have anticipated. The desperate girl who had stood on a street corner with a cardboard sign was gone, replaced by someone who had glimpsed the possibility of changing not just her own world, but someone else's as well. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, and new opportunities to discover what kind of people they really were beneath the masks they wore for survival. But tonight, for the first time in months, Amelia Brown was going to sleep well. Have you ever met someone who challenged everything you thought you knew about yourself? Sometimes the most unexpected encounters can become the catalyst for the biggest changes in our lives. What do you think will happen when Dave tries to balance his business reputation with his newfound conscience? Share your predictions in the comments. The first rays of Seattle's autumn sun filtered through the windows of Amelia's studio apartment, casting long shadows across the medical bills that still covered her kitchen table. But for the first time in months, those bills didn't fill her with dread. The check from Dave Michaels lay beside them, a small piece of paper that represented hope, possibility, and something she was afraid to name. Amelia had barely slept, her mind replaying every moment of the previous evening. The desperation that had driven her to that street corner felt like a lifetime ago, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. The beginning of trust in a man who had every reason to destroy her faith in humanity. Her phone buzzed at exactly 7 a.m. Dave's text was characteristically direct. "Car will pick you up at 8. Wear something professional. We have work to do." Amelia stared at her closet, which contained exactly one outfit that could be considered professional. A navy blue dress she'd bought for job interviews, paired with the only blazer she owned. As she dressed, she caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Yesterday, she'd been a desperate girl with a cardboard sign. Today, she was about to walk into a boardroom as an equal partner to one of Seattle's most powerful men. The Mercedes arrived precisely at 8, but this time Dave was inside waiting for her. He looked different in the morning light, less intimidating, more human. His usual armor of expensive suits was still in place, but something in his posture had softened. "Good morning," he said as she settled into the leather seat beside him. "Good morning." Amelia studied his profile as the car pulled away from her building. "Are you sure about this? Helping the Hendersons, I mean." Dave's smile was rueful. "I haven't been sure about anything since I saw you on that street corner. But uncertainty seems to be becoming a theme in my life. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Tell me that when my board of directors finds out I'm going soft." The Henderson family bookstore was located in the historic Pike Place market area, squeezed between a vintage record shop and a small cafe that had been serving the same customers for decades. As their car pulled up, Amelia could see why Dave had targeted it. The building was prime real estate in one of Seattle's most desirable neighborhoods. But she could also see why the Hendersons were fighting to keep it. The storefront had the kind of character that couldn't be manufactured. Hand-painted signs, window displays that told stories, and the warm glow of a place where books were loved rather than simply sold. "Second thoughts?" Dave asked, noticing her expression. "Just understanding what we're trying to save." Inside the bookstore, the Henderson family was waiting with the kind of nervous energy that comes from facing an uncertain future. Robert Henderson, the current patriarch, was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands stained with decades of ink. His daughter Sarah stood beside him, her protective stance making it clear she'd rather fight than surrender. A younger man, probably Sarah's brother, paced near the back of the store like a caged animal. "Mr. Michaels," Robert said, extending his hand with the dignity of a man who refused to be intimidated. "I wasn't expecting you to come in person." Dave shook the offered hand, and Amelia noticed he held it a moment longer than necessary. "Mr. Henderson, thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Us." Sarah's eyes flicked to Amelia with undisguised suspicion. "This is Amelia Brown," Dave said. "She's consulting on this matter." Amelia felt the weight of 3 pairs of eyes assessing her, trying to figure out what role a young black woman could possibly play in their corporate drama. She straightened her shoulders and met their gazes directly. "I'm here because I believe there's a solution that works for everyone," she said simply. Robert's expression softened slightly. "I appreciate the optimism, Miss Brown. But I'm afraid Mr. Michaels has made his position quite clear." "Actually," Dave said, his voice carrying a note that made everyone in the room pay attention, "I'm here to discuss alternatives to our previous arrangement." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's mouth actually fell open, while her brother stopped pacing mid-step. "I'm sorry," Sarah said slowly. "Did you just say alternatives?" Dave moved deeper into the store, his eyes taking in the carefully curated displays, the reading nooks that invited customers to linger, the community bulletin board covered with local events and book club announcements. "Tell me about this place," he said to Robert. "Not the financials. I already know those. Tell me why it matters." Robert Henderson's face transformed as he began to speak about his family's legacy. The worry lines smoothed, his shoulders straightened, and his voice took on the cadence of a man sharing his deepest passion. "My great-grandfather opened this store in 1924, he began, running his hand along a worn wooden counter that had probably witnessed a century of transactions. He was an immigrant from Ireland, barely spoke English, but he understood that books were bridges, between cultures, between generations, between dreams and reality. Dave found himself listening with an attention that surprised him. In his world, history was just another asset to be leveraged or discarded based on its market value. During the Depression, when people couldn't afford to buy books, he started a lending library in the back room, Robert continued. During World War II, he organized book drives for soldiers overseas. In the 60s, this was one of the first bookstores in Seattle to host integrated reading groups. "Dad," Sarah said softly, "I don't think Mr. Michaels needs the full family history." But Dave held up a hand. "Actually, I do. Please continue, Mr. Henderson." Amelia watched Dave's face as Robert spoke, seeing something she hadn't expected: genuine interest, even respect. The corporate predator was still there, but underneath, she glimpsed the man who had stopped for a desperate girl on a street corner. "The thing is," Robert said, his voice growing stronger, "this isn't just a bookstore. It's a community center. Mrs. Chen from the apartment upstairs comes here every Tuesday to read to the children. The high school kids use our back room for study groups. Local authors do their first readings here before they're famous enough for the big venues. And the book clubs," added Sarah, warming to the subject. "We have 7 different groups that meet here regularly. Mystery lovers, romance readers, a group that only reads books by local authors, another that focuses on social justice literature. The poetry nights," chimed in the younger man. "David, Amelia learned, Robert's son. First Friday of every month. Sometimes we get 20 people, sometimes just 5, but it doesn't matter. It's about giving people a place to share their words." Dave walked slowly through the store, taking in details he would normally dismiss as irrelevant sentiment. But through Amelia's eyes, and perhaps through the lens of his own newfound uncertainty, he began to see what the Hendersons were really fighting to preserve. "The financials," he said finally. "Walk me through what went wrong." Robert's expression grew pained. "We expanded too quickly. Opened 2 new locations in the suburbs, thinking we could replicate what we had here. But we didn't understand that this," he gestured around the store, "can't be franchised. The community connections, the personal relationships, the history, none of that transfers to a strip mall." "The suburban stores failed within 18 months, Sarah added. "We lost our shirts, had to take on debt to keep this location open." "And now the debt service is killing you," Dave concluded. "We're 3 months behind on payments," David admitted. "The bank won't extend our credit line, and we can't generate enough cash flow to catch up." Dave nodded, his expression unreadable. In his normal business mode, this would be the moment he delivered the killing blow, explained why sentiment couldn't overcome mathematics, why good intentions didn't pay bills. Instead, he surprised everyone, including himself. "What if the debt wasn't the problem anymore?" he asked. The Hendersons exchanged glances. "I'm not sure I understand," Robert said carefully. "Your debt is to First National, correct? I bought that debt from them yesterday." Dave's voice was matter-of-fact, but Amelia could see the tension in his shoulders. Which means you now owe me, not them. And that helps us how? Sarah's voice was sharp with suspicion. Dave looked at Amelia, and she saw something in his eyes that made her heart skip. Uncertainty, hope, and a question he was afraid to ask aloud. What if we restructured the terms? Amelia said, understanding what he needed from her. Instead of a traditional loan, what if it became a partnership? A partnership? Robert's eyebrows rose. Dave picked up the thread, his confidence growing as he saw the possibility taking shape. I provide the capital to clear your debt and fund improvements. You provide the expertise, the community connections, and the operational management. We split the profits based on agreed-upon percentages. But why would you want to partner with a failing bookstore? David asked, voicing the question they were all thinking. Dave was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from the family's hopeful faces to Amelia's encouraging smile. Because, he said finally, I've spent 30 years tearing things down. Maybe it's time I tried building something up. 2 hours later, Dave and Amelia sat in a small cafe next to the bookstore, surrounded by the detritus of an impromptu business meeting. Napkins covered with financial projections, coffee cups stained with the rings of intense conversation, and the kind of exhausted satisfaction that comes from solving a complex problem. I can't believe you actually did it, Amelia said, shaking her head in amazement. You just turned a hostile takeover into a partnership agreement. Dave stirred his coffee absently, still processing what had happened. I can't believe it either. My lawyers are going to have a collective heart attack. But it's a good deal, right? I mean, financially. It's unconventional. The profit margins will be lower than if I just converted the space to high-end retail. But the community goodwill, the positive publicity, the potential for expansion into other cultural ventures. Dave paused, realizing he was rationalizing. Honestly, I have no idea if it's a good deal. I just know it felt right. Amelia studied his face, seeing the vulnerability he was trying to hide behind business speak. When was the last time you did something just because it felt right? The question hit Dave like a physical blow. He set down his coffee cup and stared out the window at the bustling market street, where vendors hawked fresh flowers and tourists snapped photos of the famous fish-throwing merchants. I don't remember, he admitted quietly. That's sad. That's survival. In my world, feelings are liabilities. They make you weak, predictable, exploitable. Is that what happened with your daughter? Dave's jaw tightened. What makes you think something happened with my daughter? The way you mentioned her last night. The pain in your voice when you said she hasn't spoken to you in 3 years. For a moment, Amelia thought he wouldn't answer. Dave Michaels wasn't the kind of man who shared personal pain with virtual strangers. But something about the morning's events, about the way she'd stood beside him as he chose compassion over profit, had shifted something fundamental between them. Her name is Jessica, he said finally. She's 26, brilliant, stubborn as hell. Gets that from me, unfortunately. What happened? Dave's smile was bitter. She fell in love with an idealist. A social worker who spent his time helping homeless veterans. Good man, terrible financial prospects. When she brought him home for dinner, I made my feelings about their relationship very clear. You didn't approve. I told her she was throwing her life away on someone who would never be able to provide for her properly. I offered to set her up with the son of a business associate. Harvard MBA, trust fund, impeccable pedigree. Amelia winced. How did that go over? About as well as you'd expect. She told me I was a cold, calculating bastard who measured everything by its price tag. Said I'd forgotten how to value anything that couldn't be bought or sold. Dave's voice dropped to a whisper. She wasn't wrong. But you could fix it. You could call her, apologize. And say what? That I've suddenly discovered I have a heart? That 30 years of being exactly who she accused me of being was all a mistake? Dave shook his head. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, Amelia. Some damage is permanent. I don't believe that. Why not? Because you stopped for me last night. Because you helped the Hendersons this morning. Because you're sitting here having coffee with a girl you met on a street corner, talking about feelings instead of profit margins. Amelia leaned forward, her eyes intense. People don't change overnight, but they can start changing. And starting is the hardest part. Dave stared at her, seeing something in her face that he'd forgotten existed. Absolute faith in the possibility of redemption. You really believe that, don't you? That people can change, that good can triumph, that love conquers all. I have to believe it. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? Even after everything you've been through? Your father leaving, your mother's illness, having to drop out of school, standing on that corner last night. Amelia's smile was sad but genuine. Especially after all that. The worst moments in our lives don't define us, how we respond to them does. Dave felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the ice that had protected his heart for so long. You're dangerous, you know that? How so? You make me want to believe in things I gave up on a long time ago. Before Amelia could respond, Dave's phone rang. The caller ID made his expression harden instantly. I have to take this, he said, standing and moving away from the table. It's my ex-wife. As Dave stepped outside to take the call, Amelia watched through the window as his entire demeanor changed. The man who had just shared his deepest regrets disappeared, replaced by the corporate shark she'd first encountered. Even his posture shifted, shoulders back, jaw set, every line of his body radiating controlled aggression. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she could see its effect on him. Whatever his ex-wife was saying, it was stripping away the progress they'd made that morning, rebuilding the walls he'd started to tear down. When Dave returned to the table, his face was a mask of cold fury. Everything okay? Amelia asked, though she already knew the answer. My ex-wife has decided to remarry, Dave said, his voice clipped and professional. She wants to discuss modifying our divorce agreement. That's good, right? That she's found happiness. Dave's laugh was harsh. Margaret doesn't do anything without calculating the financial implications. If she's remarrying, it's because she's found someone who can provide her with a lifestyle I can no longer afford to maintain. Maybe she just fell in love. Margaret fell in love with my bank account 25 years ago. Everything else was just window dressing. The bitterness in his voice made Amelia's heart ache. Is that really what you believe? That she never loved you? I believe that love is a luxury people indulge in when they can afford it. When the money runs out, so does the affection. That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, Amelia, if your mother wasn't sick, if you didn't need money for her treatment, would you have been on that street corner last night? The question hit her like a slap. That's different. Is it? We all have our price. Mine just happens to be higher than most people's. Amelia stared at him, seeing the man who had shown her unexpected kindness disappearing behind familiar walls of cynicism and self-protection. You're wrong, she said quietly. About love, about people, about yourself. Am I? Then prove it. How? Dave's smile was sharp as a blade. Come to dinner with me tonight. Not as a business arrangement, not as payment for the check I gave you, but because you want to. Because you see something in me worth saving. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Amelia realized that this was a test, not just of her faith in redemption, but of whether she was willing to risk her own heart to prove that love could exist without transaction. "Okay," she said simply. Dave blinked, clearly not expecting such a straightforward answer. "Okay. I'll have dinner with you. But not at some fancy restaurant where you can hide behind expensive wine and formal service. Come to my apartment. Let me cook for you." "Your apartment?" "My world, my rules. If you want me to prove that love exists without price tags, then you need to see how the other half lives." Dave stared at her for a long moment, and Amelia could see him weighing the risks, not financial, but emotional. Stepping into her world would mean dropping his defenses, abandoning the familiar territory where money and power gave him control. "What time?" he asked finally. 7 o'clock. "And Dave?" "Yes. Come alone. No driver, no security, no corporate armor. Just you." As they parted ways outside the cafe, Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more dangerous than standing on a street corner with a cardboard sign. Tonight, she would be inviting Dave Michaels into her most private space, offering him a glimpse of who she really was beneath the desperation that had brought them together. But more than that, she would be asking him to show her who he really was beneath 30 years of carefully constructed ice. The question was, were either of them ready for what they might discover? Amelia's studio apartment had never felt smaller than it did at 6:30 that evening as she surveyed the space through Dave Michaels' eyes. The second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills still scattered across her kitchen table, the single window that looked out onto the alley behind her building, everything seemed to scream of poverty and limitation. But as she moved around the small space, lighting candles and preparing the simple meal she could afford, Amelia realized she wasn't ashamed. This apartment represented something Dave's penthouse never could: a life built on love rather than conquest, on hope rather than cynicism. She'd spent the afternoon at the hospital, using Dave's check to pay for her mother's treatment. The relief on Gloria's face when the doctors confirmed the chemotherapy could proceed had been worth every moment of the previous night's terror. "You found a way, didn't you, baby girl?" Gloria had whispered, squeezing Amelia's hand with renewed strength. "I knew you would. You always find a way." If only her mother knew what that way had been, and what it was becoming. At exactly 7 o'clock, there was a soft knock at her door. Amelia opened it to find Dave standing in the hallway, looking more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. He'd traded his usual armor of expensive suits for dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt, but he still looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread. "Hi," he said, and the simple greeting carried more vulnerability than any of his corporate speeches. "Hi yourself. Come in." Dave stepped into her apartment and stopped, his eyes taking in every detail. Amelia watched his face, trying to read his expression as he absorbed her world. The books stacked on every available surface, the photographs of her and her mother covering one wall, the small kitchen where something that smelled like heaven was simmering on the stove. "It's not much," Amelia said, suddenly self-conscious. "It's perfect," Dave replied, and the sincerity in his voice made her heart skip. "Perfect. It's a studio apartment in a building that should probably be condemned." Dave moved to the wall of photographs, studying the images of Amelia and Gloria through the years: birthday parties, graduations, quiet moments of joy captured in time. "It's a home," he said quietly. "I'd forgotten what that looked like." Amelia joined him at the photo wall, seeing her life through his eyes. "That's my mom and me at my high school graduation. She worked double shifts for 3 months to buy me that dress. She looks proud. She was. She still is, even though I've made such a mess of everything." Dave turned to face her, his expression serious. "You haven't made a mess of anything. You've made sacrifices. There's a difference." "Is there?" "I dropped out of school, I'm working jobs that lead nowhere, and last night I was ready to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Last night you were ready to do whatever it took to save someone you love. That's not failure, Amelia. That's heroism. The word hung between them, too big and too generous for what Amelia felt she deserved. I'm not a hero, she said. I'm just a girl who ran out of options. You're a woman who chose love over self-preservation. In my world, that makes you rarer than diamonds. Before Amelia could respond, the timer on her stove went off. She moved to the kitchen, grateful for the distraction, and began plating the simple meal she'd prepared. Chicken and rice with vegetables, nothing fancy but made with care. I hope you're not expecting anything elaborate, she said as she set the plates on her small table. I'm not exactly a gourmet chef. Dave sat across from her in the mismatched chairs she'd bought at a thrift store and took a bite of the food. His expression of surprise was almost comical. This is incredible, he said. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mom. She said that no matter how little money you have, you can always make a meal taste like love if you put your heart into it. She sounds like a wise woman. She is. She's also the strongest person I know. When my dad left, she could have fallen apart. Instead, she worked 3 jobs and still found time to help me with homework every night. Dave set down his fork, his expression growing distant. My father left too, when I was 12. The admission surprised Amelia. In all their conversations, Dave had never mentioned his childhood. I'm sorry, she said. That must have been hard. It was educational. My mother fell apart completely. Started drinking, couldn't hold a job, lost our house within 6 months. We ended up in a series of increasingly terrible apartments, living on welfare and whatever charity she could find. Is that why you became so focused on money? Dave's smile was bitter. I swore I'd never be poor again, never be powerless again, never depend on anyone else for my survival. And you succeeded. Did I? I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but I'm eating dinner alone most nights in a penthouse that feels like a mausoleum. I've built an empire, but I don't have a single person in my life who would miss me if I disappeared tomorrow. The pain in his voice made Amelia's chest ache. That's not true, isn't it? My ex-wife is remarrying someone else. My daughter won't speak to me. My employees fear me, my competitors hate me, and my business associates tolerate me only as long as I'm useful to them. What about friends? Dave's laugh was hollow. I don't have friends. I have contacts, associates, people who owe me favors. But friends? People who care about me rather than what I can do for them? No. Amelia reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The contact was electric, sending warmth shooting up her arm and straight to her heart. You have me, she said simply. Dave stared down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. Do I? Or are you just grateful for the check? If it was just about the money, I would have taken it and disappeared. I wouldn't have helped you with the Hendersons, and I certainly wouldn't have invited you into my home. Then why did you? Amelia took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything between them. Because when I look at you, I don't see the smooth king. I see a man who stopped for a desperate girl on a street corner. I see someone who chose compassion over profit, who's trying to find his way back to the person he used to be before the world taught him that love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Dave's grip on her hand tightened. What if that person doesn't exist anymore? What if 30 years of being a bastard has killed whatever good was in me? Then we'll find a way to bring it back to life. The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a challenge rolled into one. Dave lifted their joined hands and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, the gesture so tender it brought tears to Amelia's eyes. You're going to break my heart, aren't you? He whispered. Only if you break mine first. As they sat in the candlelight of her tiny apartment, sharing a simple meal and the kind of honest conversation that money couldn't buy, both Dave and Amelia realized they were standing at the edge of something that could either save them both or destroy everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the possibility of redemption. Outside, Seattle's city lights twinkled like fallen stars, but inside Amelia's apartment, two wounded souls were discovering that sometimes the most powerful transformations begin with the simplest acts of faith. There's something magical about sharing a home-cooked meal with someone who truly sees you. Have you ever had a moment where someone looked past your defenses and saw the real you underneath? What do you think happens when two people from completely different worlds start to fall for each other? Share your thoughts about love crossing boundaries in the comments below. Dawn crept through the windows of Amelia's studio apartment like a gentle intruder, casting soft light across two figures who had fallen asleep on her small couch. Dave's arm was wrapped protectively around Amelia, her head resting on his chest, both of them fully clothed but intimately entwined in a way that spoke of trust rather than passion. They had talked until nearly 3 in the morning, about dreams deferred, about the price of survival, about the possibility of second chances. Somewhere between Dave's stories of his ruthless climb to power and Amelia's memories of her mother's unwavering faith, they had discovered something neither had expected: the beginning of love. Dave woke first, his internal clock still programmed for corporate schedules despite the emotional upheaval of the past 2 days. For a moment, he lay perfectly still, absorbing the unfamiliar sensation of peace that came from holding someone who asked nothing of him except honesty. Amelia stirred in his arms, her eyes fluttering open to meet his gaze. The smile that spread across her face was like sunrise itself, warm, natural, and completely without artifice. "Good morning," she whispered. "Good morning." Dave's voice was rough with sleep and something deeper. "I should probably go. I have a board meeting at 9. But neither of them moved. The outside world, with its demands and complications, felt impossibly distant from the sanctuary they had created in her small apartment. "Dave," Amelia said softly, "what happens now?" It was the question he'd been dreading, because he didn't have an answer that wouldn't sound either presumptuous or terrifying. In his world, relationships were transactions, carefully negotiated arrangements with clear terms and exit strategies. But this, whatever this was, defied every rule he'd learned about human connection. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never been here before." "Where?" "Caring about someone more than I care about protecting myself." Before Amelia could respond, Dave's phone erupted in a cacophony of alerts: texts, emails, missed calls. The corporate world was demanding its king's attention, and the spell of their private morning was broken. Dave sat up, scrolling through the messages, his expression growing darker with each notification. "What is it?" Amelia asked, sitting up beside him. "Trouble." Dave's voice had shifted back to its corporate tone, cold and calculating. "Someone leaked news of the Henderson partnership. The business press is calling it everything from Michael's Goes Soft to the Smooth King's Surprising Heart." Amelia read over his shoulder as he opened one of the articles. The headline made her stomach clench: "Billionaire's Mystery Woman. Who is the girl who tamed the Smooth King?" Below the headline was a grainy photo, clearly taken with a telephoto lens, of Dave and Amelia leaving the bookstore together the previous morning. "Oh God," Amelia whispered. "They have my picture." Dave's jaw tightened as he continued reading. "It gets worse. They've identified you." Amelia Brown, 24, college dropout, works multiple service jobs to support her cancer-stricken mother. "They're painting you as either a gold digger or a charity case." How did they find out so much so quickly? "Because information is currency in my world, and someone wanted to spend it." Dave stood abruptly, pacing the small space like a caged predator. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." "What do you mean?" Dave turned to face her, and Amelia saw that the walls were already going back up, brick by brick. I mean that getting close to me puts a target on your back. The vultures are circling, Amelia. They smell blood in the water. As if summoned by his words, Dave's phone rang. The caller ID made his expression harden further. Margaret Michaels. My ex-wife, he said grimly, answering the call. Margaret. Even from across the room, Amelia could hear the venom in the woman's voice. Really, David? A charity case? I thought you had better taste. What do you want, Margaret? I want to know if you've completely lost your mind. The papers are calling you soft. Your stock price is down 3% in pre-market trading, and you're gallivanting around town with some little girl who's obviously after your money. Dave's eyes found Amelia's across the room. She's not after my money. Oh, please. They all are. The only question is whether she's smart enough to play the long game or desperate enough to settle for whatever scraps you throw her. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? I was married to you for 15 years, David. I know exactly how your mind works. You're having some kind of midlife crisis, trying to prove you're not the cold bastard everyone knows you are. But this little performance is going to cost you everything you've built. Dave closed his eyes, and Amelia could see the internal war playing out across his features. Is there a point to this call? The point is that Jessica called me this morning. She saw the articles. The mention of his daughter made Dave go completely still. What did she say? She wanted to know if it was true, if you'd really found someone who could make you human again. Margaret's laugh was cruel. I told her not to get her hopes up. Leopards don't change their spots, and you'll destroy this girl just like you destroyed everything else you claim to love. The line went dead, leaving Dave staring at his phone with an expression of such pain that Amelia's heart broke for him. Dave, she said softly, moving toward him. Don't. He held up a hand, stopping her approach. She's right, you know. About all of it. No, she's not. Look at what's already happening. Amelia. We've known each other for 2 days, and you're already front-page news. Your privacy is gone, your reputation is being dissected by strangers, and this is just the beginning. I don't care about any of that. You should. Because it's going to get worse. Much worse. Dave's prediction proved accurate with terrifying speed. By noon, Amelia's phone was ringing constantly with calls from reporters, bloggers, and gossip columnists all wanting the real story behind her relationship with Seattle's most notorious businessman. She'd made the mistake of going to work at the diner, thinking that maintaining her normal routine would help her feel grounded. Instead, she found herself trapped behind the counter while photographers with telephoto lenses camped outside, waiting for the perfect shot of the girl who tamed the Smooth King. Honey, you need to go home, said Rita, the diner's owner, a 60-year-old woman who'd been serving coffee and comfort to downtown workers for 3 decades. This circus is scaring away my regular customers. Amelia looked around the nearly empty diner, feeling the weight of how quickly her life had spiraled out of control. I'm sorry, Rita. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know you didn't, sweetheart. But that man of yours, he comes from a different world. And that world has teeth. As if summoned by Rita's words, Amelia's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Pike Place Market. The flowers stand by the fish throwers. Come alone. A friend. Every instinct told Amelia to ignore the message, but something about its urgency made her reconsider. She was drowning in a situation she didn't understand, and if someone was offering information, she needed to hear it. 20 minutes later, she stood near the famous fish-throwing vendors at Pike Place Market, scanning the crowd for anyone who looked like they might be waiting for her. The market was busy with its usual mix of tourists and locals, but no one seemed to be paying her any special attention. Miss Brown. Amelia turned to find a woman in her 40s approaching, well-dressed but not ostentatious, with a kind of sharp intelligence in her eyes that suggested she was used to seeing through facades. "I'm Catherine Walsh," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm an investigative journalist with the Seattle Times." Amelia's guard went up immediately. "I'm not talking to any reporters. I'm not here as a reporter. I'm here as someone who's been investigating Dave Michaels for the past 6 months, and I'm concerned about what you've gotten yourself into." "What do you mean?" Catherine glanced around, then gestured toward a quieter corner of the market. "Can we talk privately? What I have to tell you could save your life." Despite every warning bell in her head, Amelia followed Catherine to a small cafe tucked away from the main thoroughfare. Once they were seated, Catherine pulled out a tablet and opened a file that made Amelia's blood run cold. "Do you know about the Riverside Development Project?" Catherine asked. Amelia shook her head. 3 years ago, Dave Michaels wanted to build a luxury shopping complex on the site of a low-income housing project in South Seattle. The residents fought back, organized protests, hired lawyers. It was a classic David versus Goliath story. Catherine swiped to a photo of a young woman with kind eyes and a determined smile. "This is Maria Santos. She was the community organizer leading the fight against the development. 28 years old, single mother of 2, working 3 jobs to make ends meet." The description hit uncomfortably close to home, and Amelia felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to her?" "She disappeared." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Catherine swiped to the next image, a missing person poster with Maria's photo. The police said she probably ran off with a boyfriend, abandoned her kids. But her family knew better. Maria would never have left her children. What does this have to do with Dave? Catherine's expression was grim. 2 weeks before Maria disappeared, she received a visit from someone claiming to represent Michaels Industries. They offered her a substantial sum of money to drop her opposition to the development. And she refused. She refused. A week later, her apartment was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Then she vanished. Amelia's hands were shaking as she stared at the photos. "You're saying Dave had something to do with her disappearance?" "I'm saying that people who oppose Dave Michaels have a tendency to face consequences. Sometimes financial, sometimes personal, sometimes." Catherine let the implication hang. "But you don't have proof." "Not yet. But I have a pattern. 7 people in the past 5 years who stood in the way of Michaels Industries projects. All of them faced mysterious setbacks, lost jobs, family troubles, legal problems that appeared out of nowhere." Catherine leaned forward, her voice urgent. "Amelia, I've been watching Dave Michaels for months, trying to build a case. When I saw the photos of you 2 together, I knew I had to warn you." "Warn me about what?" "You're not the first young woman he's shown interest in. There was another girl, about 2 years ago. Rebecca Chen, a law student who was helping a community group fight one of his developments." Catherine swiped to another photo, an Asian woman with long black hair and a bright smile. Dave started showing up at her coffee shop, striking up conversations, showing interest in her cause. She thought she was changing him, making him see the human cost of his business practices. What happened to her? She dropped out of law school suddenly, moved back to California. When I tried to contact her for this investigation, her family said she didn't want to talk about her time in Seattle. They seemed frightened. Amelia felt sick. "You think he's using me somehow?" "I think Dave Michaels doesn't do anything without a reason. And I think you need to be very, very careful." Catherine closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "There's something else. The Henderson bookstore deal?" It's not what it seems. What do you mean? I've been digging into the financials. The building that houses the bookstore sits on property that's been targeted for a major development project. A mixed-use complex that would generate hundreds of millions in revenue. By becoming a partner in the bookstore, Dave doesn't just control the business, he controls the land. The implications hit Amelia like a physical blow. So the whole thing was a setup? The partnership, the compassion, all of it. I don't know. Maybe he's genuinely trying to change, or maybe this is just a more sophisticated version of his usual tactics. But either way, you're in danger. Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. If anything happens, anything at all, call me immediately. And Amelia. Yes. Don't trust anyone connected to Dave Michaels. Not his employees, not his associates, not even people who claim to be helping you. In his world, everyone has a price, and everyone can be bought. As Catherine walked away, leaving Amelia alone with her racing thoughts and growing terror, the young woman realized that she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple romance with a complicated man. She was caught in the web of a predator who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of getting what he wanted, no matter the cost to others. And she had no idea how to escape. Amelia's hands were still shaking as she made her way back to her apartment, Catherine Walsh's warnings echoing in her mind like a death knell. The streets that had felt familiar and safe just days before now seemed full of watching eyes and hidden threats. She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed the black sedan parked across from her building. Almost, but not quite. The car was too expensive for the neighborhood, too clean, too obviously out of place. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Amelia's phone buzzed with a text from Dave. "We need to talk. Something's happened." The timing felt too convenient, too perfectly orchestrated. Was this part of whatever game Catherine had warned her about? Or was Dave genuinely in trouble? Her apartment door was unlocked. Amelia stood in the hallway, staring at the door that she was certain she had locked that morning, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to call the police, to do anything except walk into what was obviously a trap. But what if Dave was inside? What if he was hurt, or in danger? Against her better judgment, Amelia pushed open the door and stepped into her apartment. The space had been ransacked. Her furniture was overturned, her belongings scattered across the floor, her precious photographs torn from the walls and trampled underfoot. But it wasn't random destruction. It was a message. Looking for something? Amelia spun around to find a man in an expensive suit standing in her kitchen. He was tall, lean, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested violence was just another business tool. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "My name is Vincent Torres. I work for certain parties who have an interest in your relationship with Mr. Michaels." "I don't know what you're talking about." Vincent smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than any threat. "Of course you do. You're the girl who's been making Dave Michaels soft, causing him to make uncharacteristic decisions that are costing certain people a great deal of money. The Henderson deal? Among other things. You see, Miss Brown, Dave Michaels has enemies. Powerful enemies who have been waiting for him to show weakness. And you, my dear, are that weakness." Vincent moved closer, and Amelia back toward the door, only to find her way blocked by another man, this one larger, more obviously threatening. "What do you want?" she asked. "We want you to disappear. Quietly, permanently, and in a way that sends a clear message to Dave about the consequences of abandoning his true nature." "You're talking about murder." "I'm talking about business. Dave Michaels built his empire by being ruthless, by never letting sentiment interfere with profit. But lately, he's been making decisions with his heart instead of his head. That makes him unpredictable, and unpredictable men are dangerous to everyone around them." Vincent pulled out his phone and showed Amelia a photo that made her blood freeze. It was her mother, lying in her hospital bed, surrounded by machines and monitors. Beautiful woman, your mother. It would be such a shame if something happened to her treatment. Medical errors are so common these days, especially in understaffed hospitals. You bastard, Amelia whispered. I'm a businessman. And right now, business requires that you make a choice. You can disappear voluntarily. We'll even provide you with enough money to ensure your mother receives the best care available, just somewhere far from Seattle. Or you'll kill us both. I prefer to think of it as removing obstacles to the natural order of things. Amelia's mind raced, trying to find some way out of the trap that was closing around her. What makes you think Dave will care if something happens to me? We've known each other for 3 days. Because we've been watching him, Miss Brown. We've seen how he looks at you, how he's changed his entire approach to business since you entered his life. Dave Michaels has never shown weakness before, which means you represent something unprecedented. Vincent moved to her overturned couch and sat down as if he owned the place. You have 24 hours to decide. Disappear voluntarily, or we'll make the decision for you. And if I go to the police? With what evidence? 2 businessmen having a conversation with a young woman in her own apartment? Besides, do you really think the Seattle Police Department is immune to financial influence? The larger man opened the apartment door, and Vincent stood to leave. One more thing, Miss Brown. Don't bother trying to warn Dave about this conversation. We'll know if you do, and the consequences will be immediate. After they left, Amelia sank to the floor among the wreckage of her life, finally understanding the true cost of falling in love with a man like Dave Michaels. She wasn't just caught between 2 worlds. She was caught in a war where she was both the prize and the casualty. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Dave. Where are you? I'm worried. Amelia stared at the message, knowing that responding could sign her mother's death warrant, but also knowing that staying silent might doom them both anyway. She was trapped in a game where every move led to checkmate, and the only question was who would be sacrificed first. The Seattle General Hospital parking garage at midnight was a concrete tomb, filled with shadows and the echo of Amelia's footsteps as she made her way to the meeting she'd arranged. Dave's Mercedes was already there, its engine running, exhaust visible in the cold October air. She had spent hours agonizing over whether to contact him, weighing Vincent Torres' threats against her desperate need for help. In the end, the decision had been made for her when she received a call from the hospital. Her mother had taken a turn for the worse and was asking for her. Dave got out of the car as she approached, his face a mask of concern and barely controlled fury. Jesus, Amelia, where have you been? I've been calling for hours. We need to talk, she said, glancing around the empty garage. But not here. Somewhere private. My penthouse. No. Somewhere they won't expect us to go. Dave's expression sharpened. They. Who's they? Instead of answering, Amelia got into the passenger seat of his car. After a moment's hesitation, Dave joined her, and they drove in tense silence to a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where truckers and insomniacs gathered, where 2 people could talk without being overheard. In a corner booth, under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and surreal, Amelia told Dave about Vincent Torres' visit, about the threats against her mother, about the impossible choice she'd been given. Dave listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee. Vincent Torres, he said finally. I should have known. You know him. He works for a consortium of investors who've been trying to force me out of several major deals. They call themselves the Pacific Northwest Development Group, but they're really just a collection of old money families who think I'm too much of an outsider to play in their sandbox. So this is about business? Dave's laugh was bitter. Everything is about business, Amelia. Love, loyalty, family, it's all just currency in the end. That's not true, isn't it? They're using your feelings for your mother to control you, and they're using my feelings for you to control me. If that's not business, what is it? Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. So what do we do? We. Dave's voice was cold, distant. There is no we, Amelia. There never was. The words hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean? I mean that Vincent Torres is right about one thing. I've been making decisions with my heart instead of my head, and that's not who I am. It's not who I can afford to be. Dave, please. You need to take their offer. Disappear, take the money, get your mother the best treatment available somewhere far from here. And leave you to face them alone? I've been facing people like them my entire career. The only difference is that now I don't have a weakness they can exploit. Amelia stared at him, seeing the walls going back up, the ice reforming around his heart. Is that what I am to you? A weakness? Dave met her eyes, and for a moment she saw the man who had held her in his arms just hours before. Then the mask slipped back into place. Yes, he said simply. The single word shattered something inside Amelia's chest. She stood abruptly, grabbing her purse with hands that shook with rage and heartbreak. You're a coward, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You're so afraid of being hurt that you'd rather destroy the best thing that's ever happened to you than risk fighting for it. Amelia! No! You don't get to say my name anymore. You don't get to pretend you care about me while you're throwing me away to protect yourself. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at him one last time. You know what the saddest part is? I actually believed you were different. I thought you were worth saving. But Vincent Torres was wrong. You're not making decisions with your heart. You don't have one. As Amelia walked out of the diner and into the cold Seattle night, Dave sat alone in the booth, staring at his reflection in the window and wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. But it was too late for second thoughts. The game was in motion, the pieces were moving, and in the world of Dave Michaels, sentiment was a luxury that could get you killed. Even if it meant killing the only thing that had made him feel human in 30 years. 3 days later, Amelia stood in her mother's hospital room, watching Gloria sleep and trying to find the courage to say goodbye. The suitcase at her feet contained everything she owned that mattered: a few clothes, some photographs, and the cashier's check for $500,000 that Vincent Torres had delivered that morning. The money would ensure her mother received the best cancer treatment available, but it would also mean leaving Seattle forever, abandoning any hope of the life she'd been trying to build. You're leaving, aren't you? Gloria's voice was weak but alert as she opened her eyes. Amelia forced a smile. Just for a little while, Mama. There's a treatment center in California that specializes in your type of cancer. The doctors think you'd have a better chance there. And what about your young man? The one who's been paying for my treatment? Amelia's smile faltered. She'd never told her mother about Dave, but Gloria had always been perceptive about matters of the heart. There is no young man, Mama. Baby girl, I may be sick, but I'm not blind. I've seen how you've been glowing these past few days, and I've seen how you've been crying since yesterday. That's the look of a woman in love with a man who's broken her heart. Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks despite her efforts to stay strong. It doesn't matter. He's not. We're not. Come here. Amelia moved to her mother's bedside, and Gloria took her daughter's hands in her own fragile grip. Listen to me carefully, Gloria said, her voice gaining strength. I've been fighting this cancer for 8 months, and you know what I've learned? Life is too short to waste on fear. Too short to let other people's choices define your happiness. Mama, you don't understand. I understand that you're running away from something that scares you more than losing me, more than being poor, more than anything you've ever faced. And that tells me it's worth fighting for. It's too complicated. There are people who want to hurt us, who will hurt us if I don't leave. Gloria's eyes flashed with the fire that had carried her through decades of struggle. Then you fight them. You don't run, you don't hide, you fight. Because that's what Browns do. We fight for what matters. I can't. I'm not strong enough. You stood on a street corner with a cardboard sign to save my life. You think that took weakness? The words hit Amelia like a revelation. In all her fear and self-doubt, she'd forgotten the courage it had taken to make that desperate choice, the strength she'd found when everything else had failed. But what if I lose? What if fighting just makes everything worse? Gloria smiled, and despite her illness, her face radiated the kind of wisdom that comes from a lifetime of choosing love over fear. Baby girl, you've already lost if you don't try. The question is, what kind of woman do you want to be? The kind who runs when things get hard, or the kind who stands and fights for love? Before Amelia could answer, her phone buzzed with an urgent text from an unknown number. Dave is in trouble. Meet me at the bookstore. Come alone. Sarah Henderson. Amelia stared at the message, her heart racing. If Dave was in danger, if Vincent Torres had made good on his threats. Go, Gloria said, reading her daughter's expression. Go fight for what matters. But the treatment, the money, will still be here when you get back. But that man of yours might not be. Amelia kissed her mother's forehead, tasting salt from her own tears. I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby girl. Now go save your prince. As Amelia rushed from the hospital toward what might be another trap, she realized that her mother was right about one thing. She'd already lost everything that mattered if she didn't fight for it. The only question was whether she was already too late. Sometimes the people who threaten us most are the ones who force us to discover our own strength. Have you ever faced a moment where running seemed like the only option, but something inside you demanded that you stand and fight instead? What do you think Amelia will find when she reaches the bookstore? Share your thoughts about courage in the face of impossible odds. The Henderson family bookstore stood dark and silent in the evening gloom, its windows reflecting the streetlights like dead eyes. Amelia approached the familiar storefront with growing dread, Sarah Henderson's urgent text message burning in her memory like a brand. The front door was unlocked, which sent the first chill of warning down her spine. Sarah was meticulous about security. She would never leave the store open after hours without good reason. Sarah! Amelia called softly as she stepped inside. Are you here? The silence that greeted her was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sound of Seattle traffic. The bookstore, which had felt so warm and welcoming just days before, now seemed hollow and threatening. Amelia made her way deeper into the store, her footsteps muffled by the worn carpet. The reading nooks that had charmed her during her first visit now looked like hiding places for unseen threats. The carefully arranged displays of books seemed to watch her with malevolent attention. Sarah! She called again, louder this time. A sound from the back office made her freeze, the soft scrape of a chair being moved, the whisper of papers being shuffled. Someone was there, but they weren't answering her calls. Against every instinct screaming at her to run, Amelia moved toward the office. The door was slightly ajar, spilling a thin line of light across the darkened store. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The office was empty. But it wasn't just empty, it was stripped bare. The desk that had been covered with family photos and business documents was now completely clean. The filing cabinets stood open, their contents gone. Even the personal touches that had made the space feel lived in had vanished. On the desk sat a single manila envelope with her name written across it in handwriting she didn't recognize. Amelia's hands trembled as she opened the envelope and pulled out its contents, a stack of photographs and documents that made her blood turn to ice. The first photograph showed Dave entering a high-end restaurant, but he wasn't alone. A beautiful blonde woman walked beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. The timestamp showed it was taken 2 days ago, the same day he had claimed to be in meetings all evening. The second photo showed them at a corner table, leaning close together in intimate conversation. The woman's face was clearly visible now, and Amelia recognized her from the society pages. Margaret Michaels, Dave's ex-wife. But it was the third photograph that shattered her world completely. Dave and Margaret were kissing, their bodies pressed together with the familiarity of lovers reuniting after a long separation. The documents were even worse. Bank statements showing massive transfers from Dave's personal accounts to offshore holdings. Legal papers outlining the dissolution of the Henderson partnership, dated 3 days ago, before he had ever claimed to want to help the family. And most damning of all, a contract bearing Dave's signature that authorized the demolition of the bookstore building to make way for a luxury shopping complex. Amelia sank into the empty chair, the evidence scattered across the desk like the pieces of her broken heart. Every moment of tenderness, every word of love, every promise of redemption, all of it had been a lie. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Dave. "Where are you? We need to talk." The casual tone, the pretense of concern, it all felt like mockery now. Amelia stared at the message, remembering how his voice had sounded when he'd told her she was his weakness, how cold his eyes had been when he'd advised her to take Vincent Torres' money and disappear. He hadn't been protecting her from his enemies. He had been his own enemy all along. A sound from the front of the store made her look up, the soft chime of the door opening, followed by footsteps on the carpet. Someone was coming, and Amelia was trapped in the back office with nowhere to run. "Amelia!" Dave's voice called out, and the sound of it made her stomach clench with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "I know you're here. Your phone's GPS shows this location." Of course he was tracking her. Of course he had been monitoring her movements, probably from the very beginning. How else would he have known exactly when and where to find her that first night? "Amelia, please. Let me explain." His footsteps were getting closer, and Amelia realized she had seconds to decide how to handle this confrontation. She could hide, try to slip out the back exit, avoid the conversation that would only bring more pain. Or she could face him with the truth she discovered and demand answers to the questions that were tearing her apart. She chose to fight. Dave appeared in the office doorway, and for a moment, Amelia was struck by how different he looked. Gone was the uncertainty she'd glimpsed in her apartment, the vulnerability he'd shown during their intimate conversations. This was the smooth king in all his cold, calculating glory, expensive suit perfectly pressed, silver hair immaculately styled, steel blue eyes revealing nothing. "There you are," he said, his voice carrying a note of relief that might have fooled her just days before. "I was worried when you didn't answer my calls." Amelia gestured to the photographs spread across the desk. "Were you worried about me, or worried about what I might discover?" Dave's gaze flicked to the evidence, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not surprise, but resignation, as if he'd been expecting this moment. "I can explain," he said quietly. "Can you? Can you explain why you were having dinner with your ex-wife while telling me you cared about me? Can you explain why you signed papers to demolish this building while pretending to save it? Can you explain why every single thing you've told me has been a lie?" Dave stepped into the office, and Amelia instinctively backed away from him. The space that had seemed cozy during their first meeting now felt like a trap. "It's not what it looks like," he said. "Really? Because it looks like you played me from the very beginning. It looks like you saw a desperate girl on a street corner and decided she'd make the perfect pawn in whatever game you were playing." "That's not." "Stop." Amelia's voice cracked with emotion. Just stop lying to me. I can't take any more lies. Dave was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When he spoke again, his voice was different, colder, more clinical. "You're right," he said simply. "It was all a lie." The admission hit her like a physical blow, even though she'd been expecting it. Hearing him say the words out loud made the betrayal real in a way that the photographs couldn't. "Why?" she whispered. Dave moved to the window, staring out at the street where they'd first shaken hands over their partnership agreement. "Because Vincent Torres was right about one thing. I don't make decisions with my heart. I make them with my head, and my head told me that you were the perfect solution to a very complex problem." "What problem?" "The Pacific Northwest Development Group wasn't just trying to force me out of a few deals. They were trying to destroy me completely. They had evidence of some questionable business practices from my early years. Nothing illegal, but enough to ruin my reputation and cost me billions in contracts." Amelia felt sick. "So you used me as a distraction?" "I used you as a weapon." Dave's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing a routine business transaction. The story of the cold billionaire who found love with a struggling young woman. It was perfect. Sympathetic, romantic, exactly the kind of narrative that would rehabilitate my image and make it harder for my enemies to attack me. And the Henderson family? The bookstore partnership. A calculated risk. I knew the building was targeted for development, but I also knew that being seen as the savior of a family business would generate positive publicity. The plan was always to dissolve the partnership once the heat died down. Each revelation was like another knife to her heart. What about my mother? The money for her treatment? Dave's smile was sharp as a blade. $15,000 is pocket change to me. But to you, it was everything. It bought your loyalty, your trust, your willingness to play the role I needed you to play. You bastard! The words came out as barely a whisper. I'm a businessman. Amelia. I saw an opportunity and I took it. The fact that you were naive enough to believe in fairy tales isn't my fault. Amelia stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the monster that had been hiding behind the mask of vulnerability. What about the threats from Vincent Torres? The men who came to my apartment? What men? Dave's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Vincent Torres and his partner. They ransacked my apartment, threatened my mother, gave me 24 hours to disappear. Dave was quiet for a long moment, and Amelia saw him processing this information with the cold calculation of a chess master planning his next move. Interesting, he said finally. It seems Vincent decided to play a more direct game than I anticipated. You didn't know about it? Of course I didn't know about it. If I had wanted you gone, I would have simply stopped taking your calls. I wouldn't have needed to resort to threats and intimidation. The casual cruelty of his words made Amelia's vision blur with tears. So what happens now? Do you just disappear back to your penthouse and pretend none of this ever happened? Actually, no. Dave turned back to face her, and there was something in his expression that made her blood run cold. You see, Amelia, you've become a problem. What do you mean? I mean that you know too much. About the Henderson deal, about my arrangement with Margaret, about the real reason I approached you. That kind of information could be very damaging if it fell into the wrong hands. Amelia backed toward the door, but Dave moved to block her path. You're not going to hurt me, she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. You're not a killer, Dave. You're just a businessman. You're right. I'm not a killer. Dave's smile was terrifying in its complete lack of warmth. But I am a businessman, and sometimes business requires permanent solutions to persistent problems. The office door slammed shut behind him, and Amelia heard the distinctive click of a lock engaging. She was trapped, alone with a man who had just revealed himself to be everything she'd feared and worse. Outside, Seattle's city lights twinkled like fallen stars, indifferent to the drama playing out in the empty bookstore. And somewhere in the darkness, Vincent Torres and his associates were probably watching, waiting to see how Dave Michaels would handle the loose end that Amelia Brown had become. The locked office felt like a tomb, and Dave's presence filled the small space with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. Amelia pressed herself against the far wall, her mind racing through possible escape routes and finding none. "You're scared," Dave observed, his voice carrying a note of clinical interest. "Good. Fear makes people predictable. What do you want from me?" "I want you to understand the position you've put me in. You see, Amelia, when I first approached you, the plan was simple. Use our relationship to rehabilitate my image, then quietly end things once the business with the development group was resolved." Dave moved to the desk and began gathering the scattered photographs, his movements precise and controlled. But then something unexpected happened. You actually started to believe in the fairy tale. You began to think you could change me, save me, turn me into the kind of man who deserved your love. I was wrong. Were you? Dave's eyes met hers, and for a moment she glimpsed something that might have been genuine pain. That's the problem, Amelia. For a brief, terrifying moment, I started to believe it too. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between our first dinner and last night in your apartment, the line between performance and reality became blurred. Amelia stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. You're saying you actually developed feelings for me? I'm saying that for the first time in 30 years, I made decisions based on something other than pure self-interest. The Henderson partnership, the money for your mother's treatment, even the way I handled Vincent Torres' initial approach, all of it was influenced by emotions I thought I'd successfully eliminated from my life. But the photographs, the documents, are real. The dinner with Margaret, the signed demolition orders, the offshore accounts, all of it happened exactly as documented. Dave sat down in the chair across from her, and suddenly he looked older, more tired than she'd ever seen him. Do you want to know the truth, Amelia? The whole truth. Despite everything, despite the fear and betrayal and heartbreak, she found herself nodding. Margaret contacted me 3 days ago. She'd heard about our relationship through the media coverage, and she was furious. Not because she was jealous, but because she was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I actually changed, if I became the kind of man who could love someone like you, I might decide to revisit our divorce settlement. Margaret walked away with $50 million and a promise that I would never contest the terms. But if I suddenly developed a conscience, the implication was clear. She wanted to make sure you stayed the same cold bastard she divorced. Exactly. So she offered me a deal. Publicly reconcile with her, abandon whatever midlife crisis was making me soft, and she would help me destroy Vincent Torres and his consortium once and for all. And you agreed. I agreed to meet with her. The photographs you saw were taken during that meeting, where I told her exactly what she could do with her offer. Amelia felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by reality. But the demolition papers were signed 6 months ago, long before I ever met you. Margaret had them in her possession as part of her research into my current business dealings. She gave them to whoever compiled this evidence package to make it look like I was planning to betray the Hendersons all along. So you're saying this is all fake? That you never intended to hurt me or the Henderson family? Dave's expression grew pained. I'm saying that the truth is more complicated than either complete innocence or complete guilt. He stood and moved to the window again, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The original plan was exactly what I told you, Use our relationship for positive publicity, then end it quietly. But somewhere along the way, that plan changed. I started to care about you, about your mother, about the Hendersons and their bookstore. Then why are we here? Why the locked door, the threats, the talk about permanent solutions? Dave turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her blood freeze. Because Vincent Torres didn't just threaten you, Amelia. He threatened me. And the message he sent was very clear: eliminate the weakness, or he would eliminate it for me. What message? Dave pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph that made her gasp. It was her mother, lying unconscious in her hospital bed. But something was wrong with the image. The machines around Gloria's bed were different. The room was different. This was taken 2 hours ago, Dave said quietly. But not at Seattle General. Your mother has been moved to a private facility controlled by Torres and his associates. The room spun around Amelia as the full scope of the trap became clear. They kidnapped her? They relocated her for her own safety, according to the hospital staff. Apparently, there were concerns about her security given the media attention surrounding our relationship. But you know better. I know that Vincent Torres has your mother, and he's using her as leverage to ensure my cooperation. The choice he's given me is simple: eliminate you as a factor in my decision-making, or watch him eliminate both of you. Amelia sank into the chair, overwhelmed by the realization that she had been a pawn in a game far more complex and dangerous than she'd ever imagined. So what happens now? She whispered. Dave's smile was sad and terrible. Now we find out whether the smooth king has truly learned to love, or whether 30 years of being a monster has killed whatever humanity he had left. The office fell silent except for the sound of Amelia's ragged breathing and the distant hum of the city outside. Somewhere in the darkness, her mother lay helpless in the hands of men who saw human life as just another business expense. And the only person who might be able to save them both was the man who had just admitted that everything she thought she knew about him might be a lie. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Dave stood by the window, his reflection a dark silhouette against the city lights, while Amelia sat frozen in the chair, trying to process the magnitude of the trap that had closed around them both. There's something else, Dave said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Something I haven't told you. Amelia looked up at him, seeing the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Vincent Torres isn't just working for the development group. He's working for someone much more dangerous, someone who has a very personal reason for wanting to destroy me. Who? Dave turned from the window, and in the dim light of the office, his face looked haggard, older than his 45 years. My brother. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. Your brother. Michael Michaels. Older by 3 years, smarter by every measure that matters, and the rightful heir to everything I've built. Dave moved to the desk and sat down heavily, as if the weight of the revelation was too much to bear standing. When our father left, Michael was 15. Old enough to understand what was happening, old enough to try to hold our family together. He got a job after school, helped our mother with the bills, made sure I stayed in school even when we could barely afford food. What happened to him? I happened to him. Dave's voice was filled with self-loathing. When I started making money, when I began building my empire, Michael was there every step of the way. He was my partner, my advisor, my conscience. Every major decision I made with his input. But success is a drug, Amelia. And like any addict, I eventually decided I didn't need anyone else. I forced Michael out of the company, bought out his shares for a fraction of what they were worth, and told him that sentiment had no place in serious business. The pattern was becoming clear, and Amelia felt sick as she realized the scope of Dave's capacity for betrayal. He tried to fight you? He tried to reason with me, reminded me of everything we'd been through together, everything he'd sacrificed to help me succeed. But I was drunk on power, convinced that I was invincible. Dave's hands were shaking now, and Amelia could see the cost of carrying this guilt for so many years. The last thing Michael said to me was that someday I would lose everything that mattered, and when that day came, I would finally understand what I had done to him. And now that day has come. Now that day has come. Vincent Torres is just the weapon. Michael is the one pulling the trigger. Amelia stood and moved closer to Dave, drawn by the raw pain in his voice despite everything he had done to her. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth before you make your choice. What choice? Dave looked up at her, and she saw tears in his eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd seen from him since entering the office. Vincent Torres gave me an ultimatum. I have until midnight to deliver proof that you're no longer a factor in my life. If I don't, he kills my mother. He kills you both. And then he destroys everything I've built, piece by piece, until I'm left with nothing but the knowledge that my selfishness cost the lives of the only people who ever saw something worth saving in me. Amelia stared at him, understanding finally dawning. You're asking me to help you fake my death. I'm asking you to disappear. Completely, permanently, in a way that convinces Michael and Torres that you're no longer a threat to their plans. And in return? In return, I'll make sure your mother receives the best care available for the rest of her life. I'll set up a trust fund that will ensure she never wants for anything. And I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to become the man you believed I could be. The offer hung in the air between them, a devil's bargain wrapped in the promise of redemption. What about the Hendersons? What about all the other people who will suffer when Michael and Torres destroy your empire? Dave's smile was bitter. That's the beauty of their plan. They don't want to destroy my empire, they want to control it. Michael will step in as the rightful heir, clean up the mess I've made, and run the company the way it should have been run all along. With more compassion, more humanity. With the conscience I abandoned 30 years ago. Amelia moved to the window, looking out at the city that had become a battlefield in a war she'd never chosen to fight. Somewhere out there, her mother lay helpless in the hands of men who saw her as nothing more than leverage. Somewhere out there, the Henderson family was probably wondering why their savior had abandoned them. And somewhere out there, Michael Michaels was waiting to reclaim the empire his brother had stolen from him. If I agree to this, she said quietly, if I disappear and let everyone think I'm dead, what guarantee do I have that you'll keep your word about my mother? You don't. You'll have to trust me. Amelia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Trust you? After everything you've done, everything you've admitted to, you're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to trust that even a monster can learn to love. That even the coldest heart can be warmed by the right person. That even the smooth king can choose to do the right thing when it matters most. Dave stood and moved to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. I'm asking you to trust that you changed me, Amelia. That these past few days weren't just a performance, but a glimpse of who I could become if I had the courage to try. And if you're lying, if this is just another manipulation, another game, then you'll be dead, your mother will be dead, and I'll have proven once and for all that I'm exactly the monster everyone believes me to be. The clock on the wall showed 11:15 p.m. 45 minutes until Vincent Torres' deadline. 45 minutes to decide whether to trust the man who had already betrayed her in every way that mattered. Amelia closed her eyes and thought of her mother's words. Life is too short to waste on fear. Too short to let other people's choices define your happiness. But what happened when the choice between love and fear could mean the difference between life and death? What happened when trusting your heart could cost you everything you had left to lose? At 11:30 p.m., Dave's phone rang with the harsh insistence of a death knell. Vincent Torres' name appeared on the caller ID, and both Dave and Amelia stared at the device as if it were a loaded gun. "Answer it," Amelia said quietly. "Put it on speaker." Dave's finger hovered over the accept button for a moment before he pressed it. "Vincent. Dave. I trust you've had time to consider our discussion." Torres' voice filled the small office with its cold professionalism, and Amelia felt her skin crawl at the sound of it. "I have. And..." Dave looked at Amelia, and she saw the question in his eyes, the final moment of choice that would determine all their fates. "I need more time," Dave said. Torres' laugh was like ice cracking. "Time is the one thing you don't have, my friend. It's 11:30. You have 30 minutes to provide proof that Miss Brown is no longer a concern, or the consequences will be immediate and permanent. What kind of proof do you want? The kind that leaves no room for doubt. The kind that ensures she can never interfere with your business decisions again." The implication was clear, and Amelia felt her blood turn to ice. "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll spend the rest of your very short life knowing that your weakness cost the lives of 2 innocent women. Is that really the legacy you want to leave, Dave?" The line went dead, leaving them alone with the ticking of the clock and the weight of an impossible decision. "Amelia," Dave said softly, "there's something else I need to tell you." She looked at him, seeing something in his expression that made her heart race. "The office we're in, it's not really empty." "What do you mean?" Dave moved to the bookshelf behind the desk and pressed something that made a section of the wall swing inward, revealing a hidden room beyond. The Hendersons have been using this space for more than just selling books. They've been documenting everything, every corrupt deal, every illegal transaction, every dirty secret of every powerful person in Seattle. Amelia stared at the hidden room, which was filled with filing cabinets, computers, and surveillance equipment. "They're investigative journalists? They're the source that's been feeding information to Catherine Walsh and other reporters for years." The bookstore was the perfect cover. Who would suspect a family of book lovers of running the most sophisticated intelligence operation in the Pacific Northwest? The revelation hit Amelia like a thunderbolt. That's why you really wanted to partner with them. Not for positive publicity, but to control their information. That was the original plan. But when I actually met them, when I saw what they were trying to accomplish... Dave's voice trailed off. "You realized they were the good guys. I realized they were everything I used to be before I let ambition poison my soul." Dave moved into the hidden room and began pulling files from the cabinets, his movements urgent and purposeful. Vincent Torres, Michael, the entire development group, the Hendersons have been building a case against all of them for months. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographic evidence of crimes that would put them all away for decades. Then why haven't they used it? Because they needed one more piece of evidence. They needed someone on the inside, someone with access to the highest levels of the conspiracy. Dave turned to face her, holding a thick file that seemed to pulse with dangerous potential. "They needed me." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Amelia's mind. The partnership wasn't about saving their business. It was about getting you to flip on your own associates. It was about giving me a chance to choose the right side for once in my life. And the threats against me, the deadline, all of it, was designed to force my hand, to make me choose between self-preservation and doing the right thing. Amelia stared at him, understanding finally dawning. "You've been working with them all along." "Not all along. But since yesterday, since I realized that losing you would cost me more than losing everything else combined." Dave's phone buzzed with a text message. "Time's up." Proof required now, or the consequences begin. What's the plan? Amelia asked. Dave smiled, and for the first time since she'd known him, the expression was genuinely warm. The plan is to give Vincent Torres exactly what he's asking for. Proof that you're no longer a threat to his operation. How? By making you disappear so completely that even he won't be able to find you. Dave moved to one of the computers and began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The Hendersons have been preparing for this moment for months. They have safe houses, new identities, extraction routes that will get you and your mother out of the country before Torres realizes what's happened. And you. I stay behind and face the music. Give the authorities everything they need to bring down the entire conspiracy, including my own crimes. Amelia moved to stand beside him, watching as he uploaded files that would destroy his empire and probably send him to prison for the rest of his life. Why? She whispered. Why would you sacrifice everything for me? Dave stopped typing and turned to face her, his eyes filled with a love so pure and desperate that it took her breath away. Because you were right, Amelia. Good people do sleep better at night. And I want to spend whatever nights I have left sleeping well, knowing that I finally chose love over fear, redemption over revenge, and your life over my own selfish interests. The clock on the wall showed 11:58 p.m. 2 minutes until Vincent Torres' deadline. 2 minutes until the point of no return. Are you ready? Dave asked. Amelia looked around the hidden room, at the evidence that would bring justice to the corrupt and powerful, at the man who had chosen to sacrifice everything for love. I'm ready, she said. And as the clock struck midnight, Dave Michaels pressed the button that would send Vincent Torres and his associates straight to hell, and finally set his own soul free. Sometimes the greatest act of love is letting someone go, even when it costs you everything. Have you ever had to make a choice between protecting yourself and protecting someone you love? What do you think happens when someone who's spent their whole life being selfish finally learns to put someone else first? Share your thoughts about redemption and sacrifice in the comments. The computer screen glowed like a beacon in the darkness as Dave's fingers flew across the keyboard, uploading terabytes of incriminating evidence to secure servers around the world. Each file that transferred was another nail in the coffin of the conspiracy that had consumed his life for decades. Financial records uploading, he muttered, his voice tight with concentration. Recorded conversations, photographic evidence, witness testimonies, everything the FBI will need to dismantle the entire operation. Amelia watched the progress bars creep toward completion, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, Seattle slept peacefully, unaware that the most powerful criminal conspiracy in the Pacific Northwest was about to be exposed. How long until it's finished? She asked. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Dave's phone erupted with incoming calls. Vincent Torres, Margaret, numbers he didn't recognize. The vultures were circling, sensing that something had gone wrong with their carefully orchestrated plan. They know, Amelia said. They suspect. But by the time they figure out what's really happening, it'll be too late. A new window opened on the computer screen, a secure video feed showing the interior of a nondescript building across town. Amelia gasped as she recognized her mother lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment and 2 armed guards. Is that the facility where they're holding your mother? The Hendersons have been monitoring it since yesterday. On the screen, Gloria Brown looked pale and fragile, but her eyes were alert and aware. She was speaking to someone off camera, her lips moving in what looked like urgent conversation. She's awake, Amelia whispered, tears streaming down her face. She's okay. For now. But Torres won't wait much longer for his proof. As if summoned by Dave's words, his phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Answer it, Amelia said. But keep uploading. Dave pressed the speaker button without stopping his work on the keyboard. Dave Michaels. Mr. Michaels. The voice was unfamiliar, older, cultured, with a kind of authority that came from decades of wielding power. My name is Michael Michaels. I believe we need to talk. Dave's hands froze over the keyboard. After 30 years of silence, his brother had finally decided to speak. Michael. Hello, little brother. I see you've been busy tonight. How did I know about your little computer session? Really, Dave, did you think I wouldn't have surveillance on the Henderson bookstore? I've been watching you for months, waiting for you to make exactly this kind of mistake. On the computer screen, the upload progress showed 78% complete. Dave forced himself to keep typing, even as his brother's voice filled the room with its cold disappointment. You always were too clever for your own good, Michael continued, but not quite clever enough to see the bigger picture. What bigger picture? The one where this entire scenario, your relationship with Miss Brown, the threats from Torres, even your touching moment of redemption, was orchestrated by me from the very beginning. The words hit Dave like a physical blow. That's impossible. Is it? Think about it, Dave. What are the odds that you would randomly encounter the one person in Seattle capable of awakening your dormant conscience? What are the odds that she would be desperate enough to trust you, vulnerable enough to love you, and strong enough to inspire you to change? Amelia felt the blood drain from her face as the implications became clear. You're saying you arranged for us to meet? I'm saying I've been planning this moment for 3 years, ever since I realized that simply destroying Dave's empire wouldn't be enough. I needed to destroy the man himself, to force him to confront the monster he'd become and make him choose between love and power. Dave's voice was barely a whisper. The sign. The street corner. You arranged all of it. Your mother's cancer is real, Miss Brown. Your desperation was real. But the timing, the location, the circumstances that brought you to that particular corner at that particular moment, all of that was carefully orchestrated. But why? Amelia asked, her voice breaking. Why put us through all of this? Because I needed to know if there was anything left of the brother I once loved. I needed to see if 30 years of being a monster had killed every trace of the boy who used to share his lunch money with kids who had less than we did. On the computer screen, the upload progress reached 85%. Dave's hands were shaking now, but he kept typing, kept transferring the evidence that would bring down everyone involved in the conspiracy. And what's your verdict? Dave asked. My verdict is that you're exactly who I hoped you'd become, and exactly who I feared you'd remain. Michael's voice carried a note of sadness that cut through the cold authority. You chose love, Dave. When it mattered most, when everything was on the line, you chose to sacrifice yourself for someone else. That tells me the boy I remember is still in there somewhere. But you also spent 30 years becoming the kind of man who could be manipulated through the suffering of innocence. You built an empire on the pain of others, and now you're surprised that someone would use the same tactics against you. The upload progress reached 92%. Dave could see the finish line, could almost taste the freedom that would come from finally doing the right thing. What happens now? He asked. Now you finish what you started. Upload the evidence, expose the conspiracy, accept the consequences of your choices. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you'll find a way to live with yourself afterward. And Amelia? Her mother will be safe. I'm not the monster you became, Dave. I don't hurt innocent people to make a point. The line went dead, leaving them alone with the humming computers and the weight of revelations that had shattered everything they thought they knew about their situation. He's been controlling everything, Amelia said, her voice hollow with shock. Our meeting, our relationship, all of it. Not all of it. Dave looked up from the keyboard, his eyes blazing with fierce determination. He may have arranged the circumstances, but he couldn't control what we felt for each other. He couldn't manufacture the love that grew between us. How do you know? Because if he could have controlled that, he would have made sure it never happened at all. The upload progress reached 98%. Almost finished. Almost free. Dave, Amelia said softly, what happens to us when this is over? Dave's smile was sad but genuine. I don't know. I'll probably go to prison for the rest of my life. You'll disappear into witness protection, start over somewhere safe with your mother. And we'll never see each other again. Probably not. Amelia moved closer to him, close enough to see the tears in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his breath on her face. Then we'd better make these last few minutes count. The upload completed at 12:47 a.m. with a soft chime that sounded like a church bell tolling. Dave leaned back in his chair, exhausted but oddly peaceful, as if a weight he'd been carrying for 30 years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. It's done, he said simply. On screens around the hidden room, secure servers in 12 different countries confirmed receipt of the evidence that would bring down the Pacific Northwest Development Group, Vincent Torres, and dozens of other corrupt officials and businessmen. The FBI will have everything they need by morning, Dave continued. Financial records, recorded conversations, photographic evidence of crimes going back 15 years. It's over. Amelia sat beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. What about your brother? Will he be arrested too? Probably. Michael may have been trying to expose corruption, but he used illegal methods to do it. Kidnapping, extortion, conspiracy, the law doesn't care about his motives. Dave's phone buzzed with an incoming text from an unknown number. Well played, little brother. I'm proud of you. M. Before Dave could respond, the lights in the bookstore went out, plunging them into complete darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting eerie red shadows across the hidden room. They're here, Dave said, his voice calm despite the circumstances. Through the bookstore's front windows, they could see black SUVs pulling up to the curb, their occupants moving with the practiced efficiency of a military operation. FBI. Amelia asked hopefully. Too soon. This is Torres and his cleanup crew. Dave stood and moved to a wall safe hidden behind one of the filing cabinets. Inside were 2 pistols, several passports, and a thick envelope of cash. Sarah Henderson was thorough, he said, handing one of the guns to Amelia. She prepared for every contingency. I don't know how to use this. Point and pull the trigger. But hopefully it won't come to that. The sound of the front door being forced open echoed through the bookstore, followed by the heavy footsteps of multiple intruders. Dave moved to the computer and began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keyboard. What are you doing? Activating the Henderson family's insurance policy. On the screen, a new program launched, a live video feed that began broadcasting to news stations, social media platforms, and law enforcement agencies around the world. Anyone watching would see exactly what happened in the bookstore over the next few minutes. Vincent Torres is about to become the most famous criminal in America, Dave said with grim satisfaction. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by the sound of furniture being overturned and books being scattered. Torres and his men were searching the store systematically, looking for any sign of their quarry. Dave Michaels. Torres' voice echoed through the building. I know you're here. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized men. Dave looked at Amelia, seeing his own fear and determination reflected in her eyes. Whatever happens, he whispered, I want you to know that these past few days have been the best of my life. You saved me, Amelia. You made me remember what it felt like to be human. Dave, I love you. I know I have no right to say that after everything I've done, but I need you to know. Before Amelia could respond, the hidden door exploded inward, torn from its hinges by a small explosive charge. Vincent Torres stepped through the smoking opening, flanked by 4 armed men in tactical gear. "There you are," Torres said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "I was beginning to think you'd found a way to disappear." Dave stepped in front of Amelia, shielding her with his body. "Let her go, Vincent. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who threatens the natural order of things. And Miss Brown here has been a very disruptive influence on your decision-making." Torres gestured to one of his men, who raised his weapon and pointed it directly at Amelia's head. "You have 10 seconds to delete whatever you just uploaded, or she dies." "I can't delete it. It's already been distributed to servers around the world." "Then you've just signed her death warrant." The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger, and Dave saw his entire world about to end in a burst of violence and blood. But before the shot could be fired, the bookstore erupted in chaos. The front windows exploded inward as FBI agents rappelled through them on tactical lines. The back door burst open as a SWAT team poured into the building. Red laser sights danced across the walls as dozens of federal agents surrounded Torres and his men. "FBI, drop your weapons." The hidden room became a battlefield as Torres' men opened fire, their bullets sparking off the metal filing cabinets and computer equipment. Dave tackled Amelia to the ground, covering her body with his own as the gunfight raged around them. Through the chaos, Dave could hear Vincent Torres screaming orders, his voice rising above the sound of gunfire and shouted commands. But it was too late. The trap had been sprung, and there was no escape. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 2 of Torres' men were dead, the others wounded and in custody. Torres himself sat against the wall, blood streaming from a shoulder wound, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "How?" he gasped as FBI agents secured the scene. "How did they know?" Dave helped Amelia to her feet, both of them shaking from adrenaline and relief. "Because my brother may be a manipulative bastard," Dave said, "but he's also a patriot. He's been working with the FBI for months, building a case against all of us." Agent Sarah Chen, the FBI's lead investigator, approached them with her weapon holstered but her expression grim. "Mr. Michaels, you're under arrest for conspiracy, racketeering, and about 24 other federal crimes. You have the right to remain silent." As the Miranda warning continued, Dave looked at Amelia one last time, memorizing her face, storing the image in his heart for the long years of imprisonment that lay ahead. "Take care of yourself," he whispered as the handcuffs clicked into place. "I will," she whispered back. "And Dave, I love you too." 6 months later, Amelia sat in the visitor's room of the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan, Oregon, waiting for the man who had changed her life in ways she was still trying to understand. The room was sterile and impersonal, filled with the quiet conversations of families trying to maintain connections across the barriers of incarceration. Dave appeared at the security door, dressed in prison orange, his silver hair shorter than she remembered, but his eyes still carrying the warmth that had first drawn her to him. He looked older, more tired, but there was a peace in his expression that hadn't been there during their desperate days in Seattle. "You came," he said, sitting across from her at the small metal table. "I said I would." They sat in silence for a moment, both of them adjusting to the strange reality of their situation. The man who had once commanded a billion-dollar empire was now prisoner number 47291, serving a 15-year sentence for his crimes. The woman who had once been desperate enough to sell herself on a street corner was now financially secure, her mother's medical bills paid by a trust fund that would last for decades. "How is she?" Dave asked. "Your mother." "Better. The treatment in California is working. The doctors say she has a good chance of full recovery." "I'm glad. She asks about you. Wants to know when you're getting out." Dave's smile was rueful. 15 years, with possibility of parole in 8 if I'm a model prisoner. I'll be 53 when I get out, assuming I live that long. You'll live. You're too stubborn to die in here. Maybe. Or maybe this is exactly where I belong. Amelia leaned forward, her voice urgent. Don't say that. Don't give up. I'm not giving up. I'm accepting responsibility. There's a difference. Dave's hands were folded on the table between them, and Amelia noticed the calluses that had formed from his work in the prison laundry. The smooth king was learning what it meant to work with his hands, to earn his keep through honest labor. The Henderson family sends their regards, Amelia said. The bookstore is thriving. They've turned it into a community center for investigative journalism. They're calling it the Michael Center for Truth and Accountability. They named it after me? They named it after the man you became, not the man you were. Dave was quiet for a long moment, processing this unexpected honor. What about you? He asked finally. What are you doing with your life? I'm in school. University of Washington, studying journalism. I want to tell stories that matter, stories that help people understand the difference between right and wrong. Following in the Henderson family footsteps? Following in your footsteps, actually. The good ones. Dave's eyes filled with tears, and he had to look away to compose himself. Amelia, I need you to know something. I need you to understand that you don't owe me anything. You don't have to visit me, you don't have to wait for me, you don't have to put your life on hold for a man who might not even survive his sentence. Is that what you think I'm doing? Putting my life on hold. Aren't you? Amelia reached across the table and took his hands in hers, ignoring the disapproving look from the guard. Dave, you saved my life. Not with money, not with connections, but by showing me what it means to choose love over fear. You think I'm here out of obligation, but I'm here because I want to be. But you're 24 years old. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could find someone who... Someone who what? Someone who hasn't made mistakes? Someone who doesn't understand the cost of redemption. Amelia's voice was fierce, passionate, filled with the kind of conviction that had first attracted Dave to her. I don't want someone perfect, Dave. I want someone real. Someone who's been to hell and fought their way back. Someone who knows the difference between who they were and who they choose to be. And if I don't make it, if prison breaks me, if I become someone you don't recognize, then I'll love that person too, because he'll still be you. The visiting hour was almost over, and Dave could see the guards preparing to escort the prisoners back to their cells. He had maybe 2 minutes left with the woman who had become his anchor in a sea of regret and self-recrimination. There's something I need to tell you, he said urgently. Something I've been working on. What? I've been cooperating with the FBI, helping them unravel other corruption cases. My testimony has already led to 17 more arrests, including 3 federal judges and a senator. That's good. That's what you should be doing. But there's more. The prosecutor has indicated that if I continue to cooperate, if I help them clean up the mess I helped create, they might be willing to reduce my sentence. Amelia's heart leaped with hope. How much? Maybe down to 10 years total. I could be out in 6. Dave, that's wonderful. It is. But I need you to understand that I'm not doing this to get out early. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Because every criminal I help put away is one less person who can hurt innocent people the way I hurt them. The guard was approaching their table, signaling that visiting time was over. I have to go, Dave said, standing reluctantly. I'll be back next month. Same time. Amelia! I'll be back, Dave. Every month for as long as it takes. Because that's what people do when they love each other. They show up. As Dave was led away, he turned back one last time to see Amelia watching him go, her face radiant with a kind of love that could survive anything, even the consequences of a lifetime of bad choices. For the first time since his arrest, Dave Michaels allowed himself to believe that redemption might be possible after all. 2 years later, Amelia stood at the podium of the University of Washington's journalism school, delivering the commencement address to a graduating class that included herself. Her cap and gown felt strange after years of casual clothes and prison visiting attire, but her voice was strong and clear as she spoke to her fellow graduates. "We live in a world where truth is often treated as a commodity," she said, looking out at the sea of young faces. "Where stories are shaped by profit margins and political agendas rather than by the simple desire to help people understand their world." In the audience, Gloria Brown sat in the front row, her hair grown back thick and silver after her successful cancer treatment, her eyes bright with pride as she watched her daughter speak. But journalism at its best is not about profit or politics. It's about bearing witness to the human experience in all its complexity. It's about telling the stories of people who might otherwise be forgotten, and holding the powerful accountable for their actions. Amelia's eyes found a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah Henderson, now in her 70s but still sharp as a tack, still running the bookstore that had become a beacon for investigative journalism in the Pacific Northwest. 2 years ago, I was a college dropout working 3 jobs to pay my mother's medical bills. I thought my story was over before it had really begun. But I learned something important during that dark time. Our stories are never really over as long as we have the courage to keep writing them. The applause was warm and sustained, but Amelia barely heard it. Her mind was already racing ahead to the afternoon, to the prison visit that had become the highlight of her month, to the man who was counting down the days until his own chance at a new beginning. After the ceremony, after the congratulations and photographs and promises to stay in touch, Amelia drove the familiar route to Sheridan. The spring landscape of Oregon was beautiful, green and alive with possibility, and she found herself thinking about the future in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years before. Dave was waiting for her in the visitor's room, and she was struck by how much he had changed during his incarceration. The arrogance and cold calculation that had once defined him were gone, replaced by a quiet strength and genuine humility that made him more attractive than he had ever been as a free man. "Congratulations, graduate," he said, his smile lighting up his entire face. "Thank you. I brought you something." Amelia pulled a newspaper from her bag, the Seattle Times, with a front-page story bearing her byline. The headline read, "The Redemption of Dave Michaels: How One Man's Fall Led to Justice for Hundreds." Dave stared at the article, his hands trembling slightly as he read about his cooperation with federal investigators, about the dozens of corrupt officials who had been brought to justice because of his testimony, about the victims who had finally received compensation for their suffering. "You wrote this." "It's my first major piece." The editor said it was the most compelling story of redemption he'd read in 20 years. "Amelia, I don't know what to say. Say you're proud of the man you've become. Say you're ready to keep fighting for the person you want to be." Dave looked up from the newspaper, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "I have news too," he said. "The parole board reviewed my case yesterday." Amelia's heart stopped. "And I'm getting out in 18 months. 3.5 years total, instead of 15. The visitor's room seemed to spin around Amelia as the implications hit her. 18 months. Less than 2 years. After everything they had been through, after all the waiting and hoping and believing, the end was finally in sight. "Dave, that's incredible." "It is. But Amelia, I need you to understand something. The man who gets out of here in 18 months won't be the same man who went in. I won't have money or power or influence. I'll be a convicted felon with a journalism degree I earned in prison and a burning desire to spend the rest of my life making amends for my crimes. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you're waiting for the smooth king to return, you're going to be disappointed. That man is dead and buried. What you'll get instead is just Dave, a middle-aged ex-con who wants to spend whatever time he has left trying to be worthy of your love. Amelia reached across the table and took his hands, feeling the calluses that told the story of his transformation. Dave, I fell in love with the man who chose to sacrifice everything for someone else's happiness. I fell in love with the man who found the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most. That man isn't the smooth king. That man is you. And you're sure? You're sure you want to build a life with someone who comes with so much baggage? I'm sure I want to build a life with someone who understands that love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's hard, even when it costs us everything we thought we wanted. Dave brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently, a gesture so tender and reverent that it took her breath away. 18 months, he whispered. 18 months, she agreed. And then we start writing the next chapter of our story. Together. As visiting time ended and Dave was led back to his cell, Amelia sat in her car in the prison parking lot, watching the sun set over the Oregon hills and thinking about the future that was finally within reach. She thought about the bookstore where they had first shaken hands, about the hospital room where her mother was recovering, about the journalism career that was just beginning to flourish. She thought about second chances and the price of redemption, about the difference between the person you were and the person you chose to become. Most of all, she thought about love. Not the fairy tale kind that solved all problems with a kiss, but the real kind that survived prison sentences and public scandals and the slow, difficult work of becoming better people. In 18 months, Dave Michaels would walk out of federal prison a free man. And Amelia Brown would be waiting for him, ready to begin the greatest adventure of their lives. The adventure of building something beautiful from the ashes of everything they had lost. True love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth fighting for, someone worth waiting for, someone worth becoming a better person for. Have you ever had to wait for something that really mattered? Have you ever seen someone completely transform themselves for love? What do you think the future holds for Dave and Amelia as they prepare to start their new life together? Share your thoughts about second chances and the power of redemption. The gates of the Federal Correctional Institution in Sheridan opened at 6 a.m. on a crisp October morning, 18 months after Dave Michaels had been sentenced to what should have been 15 years behind bars. The man who walked through those gates bore little resemblance to the smooth king who had once terrorized Seattle's business community. Gone were the $1,000 suits and perfectly styled silver hair. In their place stood a man in simple jeans and a flannel shirt, his hair longer and touched with more gray, his hands calloused from honest work, his eyes clear with the kind of peace that could only come from true redemption. Amelia was waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against a modest Honda Civic that had replaced the luxury cars of their past. She wore a simple blue dress and a smile that could have powered the entire city of Portland, and when she saw him walking toward her, she felt her heart skip the same way it had that first night outside the bookstore. "Hello, stranger," she said as he approached. "Hello, beautiful." They stood there for a moment, drinking in the sight of each other, hardly able to believe that this moment had finally arrived. Then Dave reached out and touched her face with trembling fingers, as if he needed to confirm that she was real. "You waited," he whispered. "I told you I would. But 3.5 years, Amelia. You could have." She silenced him with a kiss that tasted like freedom and forgiveness and the promise of all the tomorrows they would finally get to share. When they broke apart, both of them were crying. "So," Amelia said, wiping tears from her cheeks, "what does a newly released ex-convict want to do with his first day of freedom?" Dave looked around at the world that had continued spinning without him. The trees heavy with autumn leaves, the mountains rising in the distance, the endless sky that no longer had bars across it. "I want to see your mother," he said. "I want to apologize for putting her through hell, and I want to thank her for raising the woman who saved my soul." She's waiting for us. She made your favorite breakfast. She remembers my favorite breakfast? Dave, she's been planning this day for 3 years. She has a whole speech prepared about second chances and the power of love to transform even the hardest hearts. Dave laughed, and the sound was lighter than Amelia had ever heard it. Lead the way. Gloria Brown's apartment in the assisted living facility was small but warm, filled with photographs and mementos that told the story of a life well lived. She had been cancer-free for 2 years now. Her strength returned along with her indomitable spirit, and when she opened the door to find Dave standing in the hallway, her face lit up with genuine joy. "We'll be just fine. The Seattle Times has offered me a position as their senior investigative reporter. I'll be working with the Henderson family, continuing the work we started. It's not the Washington Post, but it's meaningful work. Work that matters." Dave kissed her then, there on the Seattle waterfront with the city lights dancing around them like a blessing. It was a kiss that tasted like coming home, like second chances, like the promise of all the ordinary, extraordinary days they would get to share. When they broke apart, both of them were laughing and crying at the same time. "So what happens now?" Dave asked. "Now we go home. We start our life together. We write the next chapter of our story. And what kind of story do you think it will be?" Amelia smiled, taking his hand and leading him back toward the car, toward the future they would build together one day at a time. "I think it will be the kind of story that proves love really can conquer all. Not because it's easy, but because it's worth fighting for. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real." As they walked away from the waterfront, Dave Michaels and Amelia Brown looked like any other couple in love, ordinary people with ordinary dreams, holding hands and planning their future together. But they carried with them the knowledge that they had been tested by fire and emerged stronger, that they had chosen love over fear, redemption over revenge, and each other over everything else the world had to offer. It was, Amelia thought, exactly the kind of story she had always wanted to tell. The wedding was small and simple, held in the garden behind the Henderson family bookstore on a sunny Saturday in May. Gloria Brown walked her daughter down the aisle, her step steady and strong, her face radiant with joy. Sarah Henderson officiated, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades witnessing the power of love to transform lives. Dave stood at the makeshift altar, wearing a simple black suit that had cost less than his old ties, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face as she approached. Beside him stood his best man, Michael Michaels, who had served his own prison sentence and emerged with a renewed commitment to using his skills for good rather than profit. The guest list was small but meaningful. Gloria and the Henderson family, Dave's colleagues from the nonprofit where he now served as director, Amelia's fellow journalists from the Seattle Times, and a handful of former inmates whose lives had been changed by Dave's counseling and advocacy work. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, speaking of second chances and the courage to change, of love that survives prison sentences and public scandals, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "I promise to choose you every day," Amelia said, her voice strong and clear. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're perfectly mine." "I promise to spend the rest of my life being worthy of your love," Dave replied, "and to never forget that the best thing I ever did was let you save me." When Sarah pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone who had believed in their love when the rest of the world had written them off as impossible. The reception was held in the bookstore itself, among the shelves that had witnessed the beginning of their story. As Dave and Amelia danced to their first song as husband and wife, At Last, by Etta James, they were surrounded by the books that had brought them together and the people who had supported them through their darkest hours. Later, as the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Dave and Amelia found themselves alone in the bookstore, surrounded by the quiet presence of thousands of stories. "Any regrets?" Dave asked, pulling his wife close. "Only one," Amelia said, smiling up at him. "What's that?" "I regret that it took us so long to get here." Dave laughed and spun her around, both of them giddy with happiness and the promise of all the tomorrows they would get to share. Outside, Seattle sparkled in the darkness, a city of endless possibilities and second chances. And in the bookstore where their story had begun, Dave and Amelia Michaels held each other close and dreamed of all the chapters yet to be written.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.